The following content has been provided by RWTH Aachen University.
All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Designing Interactive Systems 1. Today, we're going to be continuing our discussion of how people think about the environment they're interacting with, and we'll be looking at things such as how people process what they see and what kinds of knowledge we can differentiate in what people are learning and memorizing. We'll take another look at feedback from systems and how that influences what people think about a system. And we'll take a big and detailed look at errors, slips, mistakes, kinds of things that go wrong when you interact with your everyday surroundings, because we make mistakes all the time and it's perfectly normal for humans to do that. It's part of how we operate. And I want to give you a few models to think about these kinds of mistakes that will help you to understand what's going on there and how technology can best deal with these situations. And then we'll wrap this up sort of and congeal and sort of collect and abstract these various methods and models that we've talked about here so far into a first set of design principles that are directly derived from what we've talked about until now. As usual, let's jump in with a quick review of what we talked about last time. So we had a model of 7 stages of action. Anybody out there who'd like to try and recollect themselves what those 7 stages were? You can give it a stab without looking at your slides from last week. It'll help jog your memory, I promise. Oh, it'll be an even more memorable experience if I just call out somebody at random and ask them. That'll add the adrenaline kick to it. 3, 2, 1. All right. How about Leslie? I see your name up there. I'm not seeing your picture, but I'm seeing your name. Do you want to give this a stab, Leslie? See, that's the problem when we're not seeing video. We don't know whether that's a lurker or whether she's on Facebook or he or anyway, I'm going to try somebody else. How about Felix? Felix Groß, how about you?
Hi.
Hi.
I think first step is the goal, formulating the goal. Then comes the plan. Then specifying the plan, I think. Then performing the action. Then perceive what has happened. I think that next step is interpret what happened and then compare to what we had in mind in the first place. Exactly.
Yep. Those are the 7 stages. It's kind of a cycle. And you mentioned the 7 stages perfectly. We divided the model into this left and right side. And we also talked about that, things aren't always happening or starting with a goal in mind. Sometimes external events will trigger that cycle. Good. Excellent. Thank you, Felix. Next thing we talked about were we had, apart from the variations where I already said that, you're going to abandon things and you're going to sometimes start in different places for this model. We talked about gulfs and the design implications for those. So can somebody explain to me what an example for a gulf would be in this model? Why did we talk about gulfs to start with? Yeah, seeing a hand. Janos, go ahead.
So one of the gulfs would be the gulf of execution, where you can have a goal, but your plan, or either your plan, you can't generate a plan, or your plan doesn't correctly operate with whatever you're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's when it breaks down on sort of the left-hand side. That's my left here. The left-hand side of the model. as we're trying to affect the world, starting from the goal that we had in mind. And then, of course, there was another gulf of evaluation that happens when we somehow have problems perceiving or interpreting the result or comparing it to what we were set out to do in the first place. Good. Okay. So thanks, János. And we've got next up, we talked about something that I think is super important because you will come across this all the time when you're designing interfaces, laying out things, and thinking about how am I going to represent what's out there in the world, what the person is supposed to control or get visualized, how am I going to represent that in the UI. And this was mappings. Can somebody remind me of, we talked about natural mappings as an example of mappings, an example of good mappings. And there were different kinds in which they could be natural, different types of these mappings. Anybody recall an example of that? So again, we had a couple of those. Yeah, Zion, go ahead.
We had spatial mappings, perceptual mappings, and I think biological mappings. So, yeah.
And they were, in fact, they were not just mappings, but those were, they were natural mappings because we called them analogies, right? Yeah. So, for example, it's not any arrangement of buttons to control a set of lights will be a spatial mapping, some sort of mapping, right? Always, because there's a spatial arrangement of the buttons and there's a spatial arrangement of the lights. But if it's a natural mapping, it will be an analogy. So it will be sort of similar, right? So that by looking at the buttons, I know which light is going to be controlled by which button. Great. So you mentioned those. We also talked about, the difference between, or there were some semantic. Oh, sorry. This is moving on to the constraints that's coming up next. One of the things to keep in mind in mappings is that they are not the same as an affordance, right? An affordance is a quality, very generally speaking, of an object that somehow suggests how it should be used. You could have you could have a set of buttons that clearly suggest that there's 5 buttons to press, but you don't know yet what they're going to be controlling, right? So, and the mapping could be good or bad, but the buttons are going to suggest maybe something to you how the mapping could be. And if it's well designed, then the affordance, and the way that the buttons are arranged speaks to you and suggests themselves to you how they arrange is actually how they work, right? If it's not, then it messes you up. Good. Moving on to constraints and the difference of affordances and constraints. And again, we had a couple of different types of these. Anybody recall an example of a constraint? Yeah, Theo Guo, go ahead.
There was the physical constraint with the example of the staircase where we had a kind of door where we couldn't go down.
Exactly. That's right. That's a good picture, right? To know I'm not supposed to go down there. I can if I open up that gate, but it's going to stop me from just doing that without thinking. Any other examples maybe of constraints we saw? Shailesh, yeah.
So another example was semantic constraints, and they described what the possible actions were given the current situation, and there could be, for example, I actually can't think of any examples, but I know that there's because
there's definitely semantic constraints out there.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. Good. So physical and semantic, those were 2 that we talked about to distinguish them. The semantic ones were the ones where you look at the situation and something about the meaning of what you're looking at suggests to you how things should be and how they cannot be. I think we had the example of the the pilot figurine that goes into a plane, where you would not put it in backwards, right? Great. We had 2 more examples of constraints. Anybody remember other types? Yeah, Janos, go ahead.
I know it was not as strict because it depends on the audience, but there were cultural constraints where if people have standards or if there are already standards in the situation, then it constrains people to act within them.
Yep, exactly. So those are obviously limited to the culture, as the name already suggests. You're very, very right there. And those still are a huge cue, right? When you are comfortable and well established and know a certain culture or subculture, then those constraints can be very convenient, right? To communicate things to do, things not to do in an environment. And the last one out there, it was kind of closely related to the semantic constraints. Yeah, Philip.
The last one was the logical constraints. For example, I think we had tasks that are supposed to be done in a specific order. So task 1 before task 2 and task 3 and so on.
Yep. So the logical constraints were the last example that we looked at. Saif, go ahead.
Yeah, an example for the logical constraint would be, let's say you have 2 lamps and 2 switches for that. So we would logically think that the left switch is for the left lamp, something like that.
And this is a good example because what you just described, you could consider a logical constraint. You could also consider look at it from using this affordances model, or sorry, the mappings model, and say that's just a natural mapping, right? So both claims are correct, right? And this is very typical. All these models that are trying to describe what's going on in our head are, of course, brutally simplifying things, right? They're a tiny lens that we're looking through at one facet of how the brain works, which is super complex. And so many different lenses will look at the same phenomenon and give you an understanding of that phenomenon looking through that lens. That's a very typical thing that you will see in the social sciences and psychology especially, but also in many of the natural sciences. Maybe not so much in things like mathematics, but this is very typical. So don't be surprised if there's more than one right answer in these kinds of cases. Great. So today I'm going to start with something that is a bit of a sidestep in a way. It's something that was actually not in the original book, Design of Everyday Things, when it came out, but that Norman added later in a different book at first, and then sort of pulled it into the new edition of this book, because this is really quite a useful model for thinking about, thinking about how an interface influences people and what usability really means. Because what we've talked about so far, and what we'll be talking about, in fact, for most of the time in this class, is this middle level, I will call it, of processing, which is about, I'm looking at something, my head makes up some mappings, recognizes affordances. So it's all, it's all sort of rational thinking, right? It's what's going on in my head. I can't always suppress it, but it's, like, for example, with the Gestalt laws, they just happen, but they're all pretty orderly. There's not a lot of emotion going into this, right? And that is it's a very valid lens at looking at usability, but it's a limiting view. And that's a limiting view also that you can see in the original edition of the Design of Everyday Things, which looks very much at usability from this utilitarian sort of rational thinking kind of logical level. And over the years, the community realized that a lot of the questions that we try tackle in usability actually have even, have reasons or aspects that we need to think about that are even less comfortable to computer scientists, right? Because they have to do with emotions, they have to do with social interactions, and they have to do with, the complex social interplay between, people. But we have to acknowledge that this is going on, and we need to at least be aware of it. So this is basically, these three levels of processing are three levels at which you are looking at an object and making up your mind whether you kind of like it or not, right? To put it simply. And let's start at the very, very bottom level, the visceral level. This is the sort of most basic level of you making up your mind about an object, whether you like it or not, whether you think it has certain qualities or not. The visceral level, visceral comes from, it's got to do with the body, right? It's at the level of, blood and tissue, so to say. So it's a level that is very a bodily reaction, almost an impulse-driven reflex, right? So it's something that you are doing completely subconsciously. It's not something that your brain consciously thinks about so that you would, be aware of it. So, looking at this car here, cars are gradually, for me at least, sort of becoming a bad example because they're not really that great of an object to have around in general. But for now, let's stick with the car, okay? Somebody looking at this car, you don't know yet whether, whether that car actually will work. You don't know yet whether once you get in, you will be able to use the controls and find your gears and whatever and get this engine started all that easily, or whether it's going to be complex and difficult. But there's, this first, second sort of, this initial impression of, ooh, this looks cool, right? And this is an impulse action that has to do with, things that you can't really control from a very rational point of view. And what people often do then is they have this visceral level reaction to an object, and then they try to rationalize their thinking, saying like, oh, I'm sure this car will go very fast, or it will be very reliable, or it will be a high quality and very, very safe to drive in because it's good materials, and so on and so on. But often that is driven by an initial visceral level reflex action, impression of seeing something. And of course, product designers know this, right? And they of course play with this level, and they use it to their advantage so that you fall for this in a way. Other examples of visceral level reactions are if you put on some 3D VR goggles in a head-mounted display, and we put you out on a on a virtually simulated platform looking down into an abyss, you're going to feel vertigo, right? You can tell yourself 100 times, I'm just wearing VR goggles. I've done this. Right? We've had a wonderful exhibition in the museum here in Aachen, the Ludwig Forum, that had a couple of those nice VR simulations in there. And you go out there and you're standing on museum floor and nothing is dangerous at all, but still your body will go like, oh my God. Right? Or you're basking in the sun, you're feeling the warmth, and it gives you, it induces a happy feeling. That's something that happens without you noticing or consciously thinking about it, really, right? So that's the visceral level. So maybe emotions isn't really the right word for this. It's probably more like hard-coded responses of your body to certain impressions on your senses, right? That's sort of what it is. Emotion sounds so like we could talk about it and you could maybe change your emotional reaction to something, but that's not quite what this is. This is a level that is not really open to changing consciously. So that's the lowest level. Then we've got what we would call the behavioral level. And this level, this middle level, is the one that by now, that we've talked about these last couple of classes. This is the classic level, the level of classic usability. How does the system react? How does it behave? That's why it's called behavioral level, right? Because it's of the behavior of the system. What will it do when I press this button, right? So this is on this is not about, a button having a very high quality feel, because that would be level 1, right? But it's about, when I press that button, does it click appropriately, fast enough? Does it respond quickly, etc.? And in the behavioral level is sort of built around what's called learned responses, right? So unlike what we talked about earlier, these subconscious hard-coded responses, hard-coded in the sense that you can't really change them, or you've never learned them consciously. These are things that you've learned, right? You've flicked, a million switches in your life, and at some point you continue building a model of how a switch should work and what you expect to happen. And whenever you see something that kind of looks like a switch, it's a pattern matching going on in your brain that says, oh, let's use the switch routine that we've learned. I'm sure if I flick this thing, it's going to turn on that light right next to it. So this is still happening mostly subconsciously, when although you are learning it over time, that pattern. The behavioral level, as we saw before, a lot of it is often happening on a mostly subconscious level, right? You don't stop and ponder, this looks like a switch. Maybe if I flick it up, you're not doing that, right? You're just seeing this thing, and next thing you know it, you flick it because you think that's how it works. So it is also still a pretty fast response. For example, when you do sports or walking, any of these things, any learned habit really that you've acquired, and that is associated with an expectation, will be a match for this behavioral level. Already at this level, though, there is something else going on, which is kind of interesting. When you remember that picture I showed of that nuclear power plant control room in the beginning? Assume you walk into that. You're probably going to feel a little intimidated in terms of, yeah, I wouldn't know what to do here if somebody told me, bring down the reactor temperature, right? It's an overload. So any interface will already induce certain also emotional responses. For example, a hope or a feeling of calmness and I feel confident handling this thing, or maybe a more level of uncertainty, maybe even fear of breaking things if I do the wrong action in this interface. So there's already an emotional level at this level, and that is because we have a certain expectation of what's going to happen when we do certain things, and we don't know whether the system is going to fulfill those expectations. We just assume. So doing the right set of actions, will induce something like hope or fear, and that will largely depend on what you're seeing, right? So you look at this thing and you wonder, okay, is this how it? I kind of assume this is how it works. Let's hope it does it that way. And then when you use it and you see the results and you compare them to your goal, and your conceptual model that you built, you will feel relieved and say, oh yeah, that's exactly how I expected this switch to work, or this thingamabob. Or you might feel despair, right? Walk up to a microwave and you just want to heat up, your soup for 2 minutes on full power, and you turn that knob and you're kind of hoping that this is how it works, but hopefully it does. But if it doesn't, then you'll be sort of in a mild level of stage of despair of like, oh crap, this is a more complicated microwave than I thought. So I need to figure out how this works now. Okay, so this is, you can see I love elevators, right? It's always so easy to find great elevator interfaces. This is an interface where you would probably struggle with it for a moment on this, and this is what we talked about, right? This is clearly wrong on a behavioral level. It'll confuse you and it'll take you unnecessary time to figure it out, but then you'll figure it out. But every time, as somebody enters that elevator, for the very first moment, they're going to be a little, off balance, right? It's going to confuse them for a moment, and that's not a good place to be in, right? So we don't want our users to fall into that unless that's specifically designed that way, for example, in games or something. All right, and then we have a third level. So this second one was the traditional usability level, if you want. And the third one is this reflective level. And that is something that occurs largely in retrospect. It's conscious thinking about events that have happened. So slow and deep thinking, as opposed to this fast, stimulus response kind of thinking. This is where you try to find causes for events, and you often associate causality or maybe blame in a negative experience. This is the highest level of emotions that is associated with this. Things such as guilt or pride, blame or praise, and so on and so on. And they get retained in memories. That makes them very important in the long run. They have a lasting impact. So in a way, this is often influenced by the message that a product sends, which is of course often highly depending on the culture. I mean, we're looking at a Rolex watch here, okay? So the Rolex, to many people suggests, ooh, whoever is able to buy a Rolex is probably a rich person, right? He's successful or she's successful, and it's a prestigious piece of a watch. So all these things are part of reflective design, right? This Rolex could be hard to use because it's difficult to change the date if it's ever wrong. It could possibly even, although that would quickly make the illusion break down when you get it in your hands, it could be made out of plastic with just a thin veneer of metal paint on it to look right. All those things would not break this reflective level of design. When you see that watch in the shop window, it'll speak out to you on that level. So even though it might break on other levels, it can have this effect on this level. And that's often an example, right? Often people pick up there's a couple of maybe images in a gallery on sale, and people might go, if they can afford it, might go for the more expensive painting, even though the cheap one maybe even is more aesthetically pleasing, but they want to show that they can afford having that expensive painting out there. Okay, so what does that mean for design? As I already said, product designers, industrial designers who are largely concerned with the with this handling of objects and the visceral level of design here, of course also with the other levels, but they are the ones who can also influence the visceral level of design, will try to make products feel attractive, right, on some level. On the behavioral level of design, you follow the typical usability rules that we've been talking about mostly in this class. One of the reasons why we're focusing on this middle level is because if you have, for example, an iPhone and you've got the widget set available with the typical buttons and stuff that are out there, there isn't that much that you can do on the visceral level. There's a little that you can do, but a lot of the visceral level of design will be influenced by the question whether this phone feels right to use and how it lies in people's hand, and whether they think it's a nicely designed product. And then there's the reflective design where that's sort of, you're playing the long game, right? You're trying to design a prestigious brand, for example, right? That would be a goal, again, that can only be reached through long sequences of design, and of course success with hopefully good products. Now here's an interesting effect though that you should be aware of. If you have an interface that really feels great, in your hand, and it also, oozes quality sort of, through its image, right? So iPhone, expensive, iPhone Pro, 3 lenses, wow. And the handling of it feels great and so on. These things in combination can actually put the user, if you want, in a happy place, right? And thereby users will be more tolerant towards small usability goofs. Right. So if a system has a minor issue in usability, the question whether that has a significant impact on the overall experience or not of the user will depend to a good part on whether those other levels do it right. So you got a cheap phone and it looks, crummy, it's not well, made from a physical standpoint, and it's also a brand that nobody's ever heard of. And then, you turn it on and the buttons react slowly. You're like, oh, that's exactly what I expected, right? Prep product. If on the other hand, that happens on a product that you've already sort of latched onto emotionally on these other levels, you might be like, oh, maybe it's, just warming up and it's doing some behind the scenes cleanup, and I'm sure it's going to speed up in a few days or so. Here's a little story that I really enjoyed. A couple of years ago, actually in this class, we had a visitor who came in, and he was a designer from Motorola. And they had been designing, smartphones, mobile phones. And he said he noticed the weirdest thing when he picked up the first iPhone. The iPhone had these spinners, right, for setting the date and time of an alarm, for example, that were showing you on the right-hand side. And he said he and all his colleagues and friends, in the company, they would pick up this interface, and this is not a very efficient interface to enter a time, right? You have to spin the hours separately from the minutes, and if you want to get to from like 00 to 30, you have to spin half around this like virtual wheel. It takes time. It's actually not very efficient, right? So from a usability point of view, you can do better than this. But he said he noticed, and he also noticed the same with his friends. He said while he was using this, because the spinning effect is designed really well. It's a fast display. It has a fast refresh rate. It reacts promptly. It really almost feels like you're spinning a physical wheel. There is very carefully designed haptic feedback and little ticks that feel like the wheel is like one of those, mechanical wheels with little notches that will spin and have this like whirring sound. He said while he was doing this, he was just enjoying himself immensely. He said it's so much fun to play with these like, well-designed virtual spinner wheels that will spin up and then they slowly slow down, and you can do this again. And he had so much fun playing with it that he didn't care that it wasn't effective. Right? So this is an example where, in this case, actually, I think the visceral design of this spinner was done really well because it used haptics and a very high refresh rate to show this, to make it really feel like a simulation of a physical wheel spinning. And people didn't notice that it wasn't actually a very time-efficient interface to enter a date and time. Okay, so this is the 3 levels of processing. And now question is, how does that interplay with the 7 stages of action? Well, first of all, when you think about the top parts here, these are the, if you want, high-level thinking parts of the model, right? And this is correspondingly where reflective design will often have an impact, right? So when you're thinking about reflective design here, the goal would be, as people are formulating a goal or as they are comparing the results to their goal, they should be able to do this in a state of calm and not in a state of anxiety because they are afraid of losing the work that they just did. For example, if they don't act quickly, stuff like this. You just bought a ticket and it gives you a page to check whether the times are correct. You don't want a timer ticking down, from 10 seconds to 0, giving you exactly 10 seconds to check all the data on your ticket before you need to buy it, or it all gets canceled, right? That would be terrible. So this is sort of the level of reflective design in these top parts. It's also the overall emotional experience, whether you associate, whether you blame yourself or the system or somebody else for certain mistakes happening when the goal is not achieved. There will be satisfaction when the system works as expected. There will be anger if it doesn't. So that's the level of reflective design. In a way, these middle levels, moving from a plan to the specified action sequence, is all about affordances, constraints, mappings, etc. And similarly, on the right hand side, we've got the interpretation of results, which is a large part about feedback and, again, good mappings from system state to outputs. So this is driven by concrete expectations we have of the device and of its behavior. Again, in the hope versus fear dichotomy for the execution side, and in the relief versus despair dichotomy for the evaluation side. And then finally, we got the visceral level, where you physically are interacting with the object, and you might like the feeling of a button or a touch surface or a device you've got in your hand. It might perform very quickly and smoothly. It might have this the 120 hertz refresh rate, for example, of the latest iPads and so on, is exactly working on this level, right? It makes it feel even more like you're spinning through a real, long strip of paper, basically, as you're scrolling through a document, and it increases that visceral quality of the interaction. And I remember there's a wonderful documentary out there that showed people who had been designing a mouse for the Mac, and I think it might have been the Magic Mouse, like the one with the gestures on it. And in the end, what they spent weeks on was they designed it all, they put it on the table, they moved it around, and somebody said, "This doesn't sound right." Right? As you move that mouse over, like your mouse pad, it just didn't have the right visceral experience of moving this device around. And so they went back and completely changed the materials for the little, these little feet underneath the mouse, to get the right feel and sound and haptic feedback, if you want, from that mouse just being moved over across a mouse pad, right? And it's that attention to detail in the physical execution of an interface that will influence the visceral level. It's the same with Mercedes designing their cars so that the doors, when they slam closed, they sound like an expensive car, right? There's people who do sound design on car doors, like that's their job. None of that influences the actual behavioral usability. The door will still close, the mouse will still move, right? But the visceral level is impacted. Okay, so with that in place, we'll move from the 7 stages of action and these 3 levels of processing and how they interact with the 7 stages to the question of knowledge in the world and in the head. To start this off, I want you to take out a piece of paper, and without looking at your smartphone or your keyboard of your computer, if you have it in front of you, if it has a number pad, without that, just from memory, sketch how the digits are laid out on a typical button telephone, like your smartphone's number pad, and sketch out how they're laid out on a typical calculator, including the calculator app, again, on your smartphone, probably. So just take a minute, and this is not about the precise millimeter arrangement of keys. I just want the overall layout, like which digit is going where, right? And you don't need to worry too much about anything beyond the digits. Don't worry about extra buttons for other functions apart from the digits. Okay, so this should be an easy exercise. Now, let's do a little poll here. First of all, you may have noticed that the layout of a phone keyboard, which looks like this, with the 1 at the top, is completely different from the calculator layout, where the 1 is at the bottom. Right? Now, what I'm interested in is, could you, how I'm going to do this? Maybe just give us a green response. Let me look for the responses here, reactions. Yeah, give us the green check mark. If you had not been aware of this difference before, if that is the first time you actually realize that these keywords are different, or if, for example, if you actually, you know, when you drew them, you drew the same keyboard for both sides. So if either you got these wrong and drew the same keyboard for both, or you drew them right, but this was the first time you noticed, give us a little green mark here. I'm going to see how that turns out.
Question.
Yeah.
What about what about people who knew there's a difference but couldn't remember exactly like the precise difference of everything?
Yeah, that's the same thing, right? If you couldn't quite recall the layout, so if that was giving you trouble, you can give us also a little green check mark.
Okay.
Okay, so there's quite a few here bringing that up, I see, so easily 50%. And so this is, thank you. So this is not about you know, the fact that you don't remember, although yeah, I guess in a way it is. What I'm trying to show here is none of you have any trouble when you encounter a phone keyboard or a calculator keypad. You just use it, right? It's not like you go at it and it's like, oh, so let's look at how are these numbers laid out again? So we don't notice that these keyboards are actually different. We just use the keyboard in each situation, and it's never, mostly for most people, it's never occurred to them that they're actually different. Right? So this, why does this work? Well, this all comes down to our very limited working memory, right? That we talked about in the first lecture, and you did some experiments with this. We don't usually notice consciously that these two layouts are different because this knowledge, which button is where, is in the world. It's not in our head, at least not consciously, so that we need to retrieve it every time we walk up to a keypad. How is it in the world? Well, very simply, there's labels on the buttons, right? A label on a button, that's knowledge in the world, right? It tells me what that button does. And what this illustrates is that we are actually not designed as humans to remember everything we see around ourselves perfectly in our head. You may have heard about these people who have some specific form of autism, who, when they look at a very complex, you know, skyline, for example, picture, will then draw that skyline exactly. I mean, all the details are perfectly retrieved. That sounds like an amazing feat, but the problem that these people are actually facing is that they do not have these filters working well that reduce all that precise data down to what you really need to keep around. And so they would probably not have any problems with you know, distinguishing these two keyboards because they know exactly what they look like. But most of us don't store all this stuff in our head in perfect detail because we know we can rely on what's out in the world. And this begins to show that how we use things around us is never just me retrieving a conceptual model that I've built and then applying that to the situation. There's always stuff out in the world, and I am interacting with this technology, making use of knowledge out in the world and knowledge in my head. And this is why HCI is so important, because it's a discipline that makes it super clear that when you really want to think about whether a system works for people or not, you need to think about the notion of system in a different way. A system is always a blob of tech and a blob of water in front of it, at least, right? Maybe many blobs of water, humans in front of it, interacting with it, through it, whatever. But just the tech is never enough to judge usability. You need to keep the person in mind as well. Just as you cannot reason about usability just by thinking about people without looking at how are they interacting with their environment, what is the technology giving them, offering them in affordances, et cetera, et cetera. So I remember, going to, when I needed to get some money out of an ATM, usually, I've got my PIN remembered, and I know it by heart, right, for my EC card. But the way I've remembered it is sort of, it's a finger pattern, right? And think about this yourself. When you walk up to the ATM, you've got this like, okay, that's my 4-digit PIN. It's probably a physical pattern that you've stored as much as is a sequence of numbers. And this works perfectly, right? You're using motor memory to remember it, and you can use, you can type your PIN on the keypad. I once went to an ATM in Italy, and I failed entering my number until I realized that they actually used a different key layout on their keypad. And so they switched things around on their layout, and so suddenly your motor memory fails you, and then you need to hopefully really remember that those digits and not just a physical pattern. Here's another example on how you can mess this up. The left-hand side shows an OQO. This was a handheld PC, which were all the craze in the mid-2000s, and this thing was really trying to show that it was also sort of it had a SIM card built in, right? That was a cool thing, right? This was before the iPhone, right? So before smartphones came around. And so what the designers did, because they wanted to, drive down the point that this was a phone, and they probably expected people also to use this number pad to call folks, they arranged the number pad like you would arrange a phone number pad, right? With the one at the top. Now, this completely threw off people who were using this thing in the way that you would normally use this, which is kind of like a portable computer, because they expected it to be like a numpad on a portable computer, on a laptop or a desktop, whereas you just need to look down at your keyboard. If you have an expanded keyboard, the one is at the bottom, right? Just like with a calculator. So this messed people up a lot, right? Because they were not expecting a phone layout on a computer. Today, by the way, as we just saw with the 2 screenshots from the iPhone, we can solve that, right? Because we can show people, thanks to all 100% touchscreen interface, we can just change the interface dynamically to match the task, and just show you a calculator keypad when you're expecting a calculator keypad, and show you a phone keypad when you're expecting that. So the point here is that a lot of knowledge is actually not in the head. You don't have it stored perfectly, but it is actually in the world. So this means that obviously we have less than perfect knowledge in our head, but we can actually, we can survive, right? We can act quite precisely actually with our environment. And how is that possible? Well, it is possible because whenever we have an interaction, we are actually using both knowledge in the head and knowledge in the world to do that interaction. What that means is that we do not need to store things at the highest precision. We only need to store in the head enough detail about something, an object, for example, to be able to reliably distinguish it and to reliably distinguish the right behavior from any other behaviors that are possible. So to give you another example, again, think about this for a second here, without, probably you don't have a chance to cheat with this one. Just think about for a second, what is on the front and what is on the back of the German 1-cent coin. You've seen, the coin often enough that you've handled them, and you never have trouble finding it in your wallet. But what's on the front and back? Anybody want to take a guess? Marco's walking off, getting his wallet. No, all right.
No, I just had to source something. I had to write down
No
something.
worries, that's all right. Christine, why don't you take a stab? What do you think is on the front and back of the 1 cent coin? Christine Uphoven.
Me?
No, that's Christine Uphoven.
Oh, okay, sorry.
On my screen, she's next to you, but I don't know that. I don't think that means anything to you. Do you need to unmute first? Yeah, there you go.
I don't remember. I know it's different for every country, but I know on the bigger coins there's the Brandenburger Tor, but I'm not sure for the 1 cent coin.
Okay, that's fine. Anybody else want to take a stab? Anything you might remember from the 1 cent coin? What's on there for sure? Merlin?
Yeah, well, clearly on one side there's the number 1. And that's, I think the point is that that is the only thing we really care about. It is the 1 because it's the 1 cent coin and nobody really remembers what is actually on the other side.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, oh, Pascal, you want to take another stab?
I guess on the backside there's a maple leaf. And the other side is somewhat having a background of, I guess it was the world or Europe, but I don't know.
Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Very few people can recall all these details.
I thought it was oak. Isn't it like an oak tree leaf?
I'll show you. It's not a maple leaf. You're right. It's an oak tree. Here's the picture. I mean, it's a German coin. Come on. Of course, it's an oak, right? You know, not a maple. So here's the picture, right? That's on the front and that's on the back. You were right with the globe on the front there. This little picture and the leaf on the back. And yeah, we can see a few little eicheln out down there. So clearly an oak tree. But the whole point was, you don't have trouble, distinguishing that coin from any other. So your brain basically, it's lazy, right? It says, all I need to know, it's roughly, thumb size, and it's, metallic, and it's got this coppery color, and there's a 1 on there somewhere, right? And it's smaller than the 2 cent coin, and that's all you really need to distinguish it, as you guys were saying. Pascal, go ahead.
Is there any reason why the 50 cent coins have another, let's say, layout or design sometimes, and the smaller coins have a similar, let's say, design of all over the years? Because I haven't seen another coin like the presented one right now. And whereas we have the 50 cents, I guess, or the €2, where each and every year we have another design for it or another event.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think you'll have to ask the German National Bank about that, the coinage. I don't know the answer to that, but I think maybe your point though kind of confirmed that this is probably a good example, because that cent coin should not be changing all the time. So that's probably a good thing, so that this example will work next year as well. So the whole point, of course, is we only need to remember enough to distinguish things from each other, and to pick the right behavior from the options that we see available to us. There are more reasons why this is working, right? For example, constraints are in effect a lot of the time when you are out in the world and doing stuff, right? Physical constraints will limit the actions that are possible. For example, let's say you decide to repair your toaster. Hopefully you pull the plug first, and then you will find that there are only certain parts that can be moved, that can be manipulated, or that can be combined in certain ways when repairing it, right? It won't fit together in a million different ways. It's not a box of Lego pieces. Similarly, cultural constraints are in effect a lot of the times. So you learn social rules, and once you learned them, they are applicable in many situations. For example, and this is a wonderful one, when I started going to research conferences in the US, and I'd been living mostly just in Germany until then, it was fantastic to see how cultural clashes happen, right? Because what do you do upon entering a restaurant? Well, in Germany, it used to be, at least these days with Corona and also, culture changing a bit and internationalizing a bit, but it used to be you just walk in and you sit down, right, at a table that looks free to you. That's not what you do in the US, right? In the US, you would always stop at the entrance and you would wait for somebody to seat you. And there would often be then signs that would say, please wait to be seated, because especially when you got German tourists walking into at a conference, walking to an American restaurant, they would just flood out and sit down at all these tables and completely mess up, the staff's plans for which table they were serving and which order they were doing things and so on. So cultural constraints are in effect, and they will, of course, only work within a particular culture. And then, by the way, the opposite is true too. There are grim tales of American tourists starving to death at the entrance of German restaurants because they're waiting for somebody to come and seat them, right, when nobody comes. Okay, so more examples. Back in the days when poets were traveling, the country in the Middle Ages, they could recite thousands of lines in a poem just off the top of their head. They didn't have to look at their liner notes. They didn't have a reclam, booklet with them. So why does that work? Well, in part, yes, these people had great memory. I mean, that's a given one. But also, rhyme inside a poem actually works like, we could call it a linguistic constraint, right? Because if there's a line, there once was a man from Newcastle, then it has to rhyme with Newcastle, whatever's coming in line 2, right? And this is the more obvious constraint that's in place. The less obvious one is actually a semantic constraint that the second line of the poem will probably continue telling a story that started in line 1, right? Unless it's a very, very abstract, weird poem. So the fact that they were telling a story, of course, also greatly helped them to memorize it, right? Because it was a semantic, something that made sense as a sequence. So we can say, in short, constraints, which I was selling to you as, so the evil twin brother of affordances, right? Constraints are actually good, right? Because they really limit the amount of knowledge that you need to learn and keep around in your head, right? They are barriers to keep you falling off the good path and making mistakes. And people make heavy use of these things. Humans can actually minimize, and they will, the amount of information that they need to remember. They will minimize the precision of or depth of information they need to remember by just arranging their environment and copying other people's behavior. There's reports of people who worked in offices for many years, sorting files or something like this, right? Or processing files that were incoming, and every time they got something from somebody, said like, here's the file folder for Smith, they would put it on a particular place on their table, and only years later it turned out they were actually dyslexic and they couldn't really read very well, but the order on their table helped them to know what is where, so they didn't have to read all the details on each file in order to be able to do their job. So these constraints in general, like not just the constraints, but in general, all the knowledge out in the head is, of course, something that greatly helps us do our job, that makes us more convenient, that gives us less stress about doing something because we don't need to recall something off the top of our head. Here's another example, typing. So what do you think if you've got, 3 kinds of people? You've got, your beginners typist who's never used a keyboard before. You've got somebody who's been using it for, very, very occasionally for a couple of weeks. And then you've got somebody who took a professional typing training and does a secretarial job, for example, or something like this. What kind of knowledge do you think each of these groups are using? Felix, take a step.
Yes, I think the beginner has to look for every single key and look down for the keyboard to the keyboard, search for it, and then press it. The intermediate guy, he maybe knows the location of, like, for example, the vowels, like keys he often pressed, but not so much like keys he doesn't need that often. And the expert hopefully knows the location of every keys and, for example, how he has to position his or her fingers in order to reach the keys quickly.
Yeah. Exactly. So we're seeing here the beginner is mostly using knowledge in the world, right? He's mostly, thank you, Felix, he's mostly using the labels on the keys, right? Hunting down each individual key, right? And as you learn, you start memorizing key locations of keys that you need frequently, like Felix was mentioning. And then finally, if you watch somebody who's an expert typist, it's a joy to watch, right? These people just sit down, they look at you or look at a document, and they will just type, right? It's pretty amazing, really. Touch typing is a great skill to have, and they have moved the entire knowledge about the keyboard layout into their head. And you can mess these people up to no end when you, for example, change the distances of keys or the sizes of keys or the layout, even the arrangement of keys on a keyboard. That will mess them up completely because their carefully crafted and acquired model of the keyboard that they've completely internalized then just gets broken, right? That's why this messes up people a lot. Ziyong, go ahead.
I mean, well, it is true that the world knowledge, or at least the knowledge in the world that the typists are using, decreases. I think the knowledge in their head doesn't. I would say it's a different type of knowledge. Like an expert typist probably doesn't physically like memorize where the actual keys are, but more so the motor controls, like, oh, Q means the pinky finger and these kinds of things.
That's a good clarification. Thank you, Ziyong. What you are getting is indeed what's often called motor memory, right? So, or muscle memory. So you learn that as you put your fingers on the home row, if you stretch your right middle finger just a little, then that will take you to, I don't know, the letter U or something. So it's an interesting challenge to ask an expert typist to actually sketch out the layout of a keyboard, and they probably wouldn't start. And this speaks for your case, Young. They wouldn't start at the top left and say it's Q, W, E, R, T, etc. They would probably say, well, the home row, my index fingers, they are typing G and H, and then I know next to that must be this, and so they would probably be growing out from there and building the model that way. Pascal, you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, I'm sometimes confused or stumble upon the problem that the cell phone layout of the keyboard is somewhat different than the normal computer layout because it doesn't have the vowel mutations. And if you are used to typing on your computer keyboard and you just do the motor motion, like already mentioned, you constantly write stupid shit, and it's not fitting the things you're wanting to write. And
absolutely. I totally hear you. I'll let you in on a little secret here. I started typing on computer keyboards sometime in the 80s, right? Obviously. And most of the keyboards I got were US layout, right? Because back then computers came from the US and there was no such thing as an internationalized keyboard for many machines. And then, I did through my whole PhD, I used a US keyboard on a Unix machine. And I just kept going that way because by that time I built up pretty good typing skills and was completely used to this layout. And to this day, Ollie can confirm this, all the computers we're buying at the lab have a US keyboard layout for two reasons. First of all, I never wanted to get back to a German layout. And then, of course, as you know, as computer scientists, all the commands that all the programming languages and things like that use are all basically designed around US keyboard layouts. If you've ever tried to get to curly braces on a German keyboard, then you know what I'm talking about. So this is the cost of changing this becomes higher the more advanced you are, of course. But here's an interesting question then. Why doesn't somebody who only types the occasional letter every now and then, why don't they sit down and learn touch typing? Well, they could take a class. It wouldn't even be too much effort, right? But for them, it's not worth it because they don't have to type that much in their life that it pays off to have that skill, right? So we are already seeing a trade-off point here that is really an individual question. Everybody will basically make that decision for themselves. How far am I going to push my typing skills to be, so that they are no longer in the way for me doing my job. And let me break, let me speak another word to touch typing here. The very first exercise I had to do when I started my computer science studies at the University of Karlsruhe, by the way, the very first thing we had to do was we got a sheet of paper, and on that was a paragraph of text. And the professor said to us, Professor Walter Tichy, he said, all right, guys and girls, sit down, type this in at home. And if it takes you any longer than 30 seconds, take a typing class. You're now computer scientists, and you better type really, really fast, because anything that is below, significantly fast typing will severely impact your productivity as a programmer. And so, that's what most of us did, right? And I have to say, I think if you have trouble touch typing, measure your own typing speed. There's excellent tools out there measuring your typing speed online. You can do this online today, and they will check how many mistakes you make and how fast you were and so on. And if you're not doing too great, do learn touch typing, because it really it's an extreme productivity increase. But also then know that as you are learning touch typing, you will get glued to your keyboard in a way, and you will have more of the troubles that we just heard about with like having to use other keyboards if that happens. Another thing here was if you take a look at the touchscreens of today, on the iPhone, for example, these keyboards are really hard to type on without you seeing them, right? So if you take this touch keyboard that you typically have on your iPhone, you can try touch typing on it and not looking at it, and oftentimes after a short while you will drift slightly off the keys. Now it corrects for some of that, and then of course there's word correction, and if you enable that of course opens a different can of worms. But let's assume you turn off the auto correction and you really try to hit the right keys. It's really hard on the touch keyboard. Typing on touch screens sucks. That's a technical term. It's really, really bad, right? Touchscreens are the worst design, except for maybe in mid-air keyboards. That thing existed also at one point in research. They're really bad because you cannot feel the keys. We do not have this a priori sort of feedback. It's almost a feed forward, you could say, where we can feel the keys before we actually touch on them. So if you're designing a system and you want your users to type in lots of information, please don't make them use a touch screen, right? It's just asking for trouble, and it's asking for slow performance, mistakes, and frustration. Okay. So we know the beginner has all the knowledge in the world. The intermediate sort of, starts feeling keys, has peripheral vision, maybe still glances down at the keyboard occasionally, has the most important keys stored in her head. And then the expert has all of it in his head and doesn't need any eye contact to the keyboard anymore. And as we said, there is a particular sort of, if you want, cost-benefit trade-off that we will each individually go through to decide how far we're going to be pushing that. All right, one more little exercise for you. That'll also only take a minute. You can either do this in text with a textual list or with drawing a map. Try to write down exactly how you get from your home to, for example, the main university building, right, where the Audimax is. You can also, if you don't know where that is, or if you live in a different, if you're like a Bonn student, for example, then you can pick your main university building, or pick the Hauptbahnhof. It doesn't really matter. Just pick something that you definitely know where that is, and you would know your way to get there conveniently, and it's not too far. Like you don't need to travel from Aachen to Bonn for it. So write that down. Take a minute. Make a list of instructions how exactly to get from your home to that place. Alternatively, you can draw a map too. That's fine too. All right, that shouldn't take too long there. Now, what you will notice if you take your list or your map is, and you compare it to like a view of Google Maps or something like that, and instructions from there, is a couple things. Probably you will be missing a few turns or cross streets that you don't mention because you just go straight on them. Another thing is that your streets will probably have straightened out miraculously compared to their real actual way that they run. And you will maybe even see, if you look at your map and compare it to Google Maps, what we often see with hand-drawn maps is that the crossings are actually almost like zoomed in and bigger than the parts between the crossings and the turns. Like a straight piece of road often gets shortened and gets smaller because it's not interesting. Because the crossings are the important parts, right, where stuff happens when we need to make decisions. So it's fascinating. And there was actually a research project a while ago that took normal, Google Maps layouts, normal maps, and kind of distorted them to be more like maps a person would draw to get somebody from A to B, because the maps that people draw are actually in a way more useful. So it's an interesting thing going on there. My important point here is that nobody, again, has a perfect map in their head of the streets or that they need to walk from A to B, or even inside a building. Oftentimes, entire parts are forgotten in their route descriptions. So, after class today, you can take a look at your map and compare to a Google view and see how close you got and what you might have missed. And nevertheless, we can clearly get from A to B safely. Why? Well, because again, there's signage in place. And what is signage? Signage is knowledge in the world, right? Signs that tell you this is the street name so-and-so, or this way to the main station, for example. And also, of course, there are constraints in place, such as street names or numbers or crossings where like in between these two crossings, I'm not going to veer off this street because there's nowhere to go. I need to wait until the next crossing comes, and then I can make a decision whether I go left or right or straight. So all of these things help us by supplying external knowledge, and that's why it's pretty easy to navigate even in a complex environment. So this is just another example to show you how we use this knowledge in the world. Okay, should be all set. Now, just a quick note on what kind of knowledge is out there, actually, because most of the knowledge that we think about is declarative knowledge. Things that you could answer with, like a what question, basically. Stuff includes things like, facts, Bonn is southeast of Aachen, or rules, stop at red traffic lights, or things like that. And they are all actually the easy kind of knowledge because they're easy to remember, and they're easy to write down and easy to teach, not necessarily easy to learn because they're just facts. The other type of knowledge, though, is what's called procedural knowledge. How do you do something? For example, how do you play an instrument? How to play violin? These are actually really hard to write down because a lot of the knowledge around it is, the things that you need to learn around it are subconscious subconscious skills and patterns. So they're hard to teach. I could not even, I play the piano, but I couldn't give you a good class on how to play the piano by just talking to you over Zoom or even in person. You would have to sit down at an actual piano and train, and I would have to show you, and we'd have to be there and do that together. So procedural knowledge is actually much harder to capture. And what can we do in design? Well, at least the declarative knowledge, the what knowledge, the facts, rules, stuff like this. These are actually pretty easy to express in a user interface, through labeling, through affordances, mappings, etc. You can give people an easy time of not having to remember all the declarative knowledge. They might still have to have a lot of the procedural knowledge down themselves. Which leads kind of to the question of how much can we remember? Remember, we had a look at the CMN model, which said basically, long-term memory is essentially, infinite in capacity. Short-term memory has the severe limitation on 7 chunks, plus or minus a few. Modern studies suggest that it's more like 4 chunks, plus or minus 2. So how much can we remember in practice? Well, it actually depends on the kind of knowledge. Because if it's a random unconnected fact, just data points, it's very little, I remember that people for the longest time had trouble remembering Control-Alt-Delete to log on, right? That was a thing that you had to press in Windows, I don't know, NT or something, because before that it would have rebooted your computer, and then they decided that's a great keyboard combination to use to have people log on. Funny story about that, I used this example for a couple of years in the classes before somebody pointed out that in my original version of the slide, it actually said, I think, Control-Shift-Delete or something. It was wrong, right? So even I couldn't remember that sequence correctly. So these random unconnected facts that don't really make sense to you, you cannot actually learn per se. You can only learn them via associations, which takes me to the associative memory model. We briefly touched on this when we talked about the CMN model, but if you need to have a model of how our brain remembers stuff, then a good starting point is the associative model, which basically means that our brain cannot remember things, but only associations, only links. So our brain is not made up of little nuggets of knowledge sitting next to each other, but really mostly of edges of a graph. And so remembering the concept of an apple means that you tie it to the concept of round and tie it to the concept of fist size. You tie it to the concept of, sour fruity taste, and you tie it to the concept of edible, stuff like this. I had a guy once when I was giving this class, I was still a grad student back then, who was actually able to remember the first 1,000 digits of pi, right? Which is an amazing feat. And it was fascinating he demonstrated this in class to show that he could do that. And it was fascinating to see how he failed. He wouldn't get individual numbers, digits wrong. He would get entire sequences wrong and turn them around, for example, or swap them, right? The reason for that was, of course, he had built up a lot of associations around the individual digits that were larger chunks of things to remember that he could then basically compress down and remember. So for example, if there was a sequence that was 747, he would remember a Boeing 747, right, for that sequence, not the 3 digits. And so, and he would do on top of that, if there was 747, 03, 747, then he would remember, 2 Boeings and with the 03 in the middle, right? So he would build these like higher and higher abstracted structures around the data. Now, the problem with these random unconnected facts and remembering them is not just that it's hard to remember them, it takes a lot of effort, but also if you get something wrong, if your recipe, especially for a do this, then this kind of recipe, if that fails, you're lost. I'll give you an example. Some of you have probably explained the internet to your parents, right? Or maybe Facebook or something, right? Yeah, we've all been there. And you may have written these little notes to your parents or grandparents that say, if you need to, send an email, press this button, then open this menu, then flick this switch, and so on. And this is great until there's a system update, right? The system gets updated in a minor way, something that wouldn't throw you off at all. But these people who are following these recipes are lost because the recipe does not convey understanding why you're doing stuff. It just tells you, press this button, press this button, press this button. So connected facts are easier to remember. You can do better than that. Because then you are really using associations in a natural way, right? Not just to build bridges where there were none, but actually just using them. So we talked about the motorbike indicator, right? It's hard to remember which way to flick the switch on the motorbike handle to turn your indicator light on until you understood that it just moves in the same direction that the handle moves as you turn around the corner. The moment you've understood that, it's super easy to remember. You've built an association that makes sense to you. So it depends on how much we can remember. It depends on whether it's unconnected or connected facts. So here's another little exercise. We're not going to go down the rabbit hole with this. Just real quick, how many online accounts with passwords do you have? Just think about that. Give it a rough estimate, right? Okay. I know this is tough. I have a long list. How many of those do you remember the passwords to off the top of your head without looking at your little, cheat sheet, whatever it is, 1Password file, something? And the third question then is, that's the embarrassing one, for how many of these are you using the same password? Oh, none, of course. All the computer scientists are saying like, I would never do that, right? Okay, so we can be honest here. Nobody's listening, right? We're not recording this. No, of course we're recording this. Everybody's listening, but hey, still. I'll need a volunteer here who's willing to share these embarrassing details about your personal life with us. Andreas, you look like you really want to do that.
Do I? I'm not sure.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I have like I think 2 or 3 passwords which I use for my different accounts. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's perfectly normal. Right? So the others, you don't all need to reveal yourselves, but I think this is not unusual, right? We're reusing passwords a lot because we just can't be bothered to remember all these different, and we actually cannot remember them, right? If it's really, the same, if it's a completely different random password, it would be impossible to remember. There's lots of tricks out there to make passwords that others have a hard time guessing, but you have an easy time remembering, like taking the first letter of each word from a sentence, right? That you can easily remember and then make that into a password. That's a great way to build a password. But we use these tricks because we need associations to hold on to this stuff, right? And now this is just online accounts, right? Now think about credit cards, your bank accounts with your wonderful IBAN numbers these days, your number plates if you have a car or some other vehicle, phone numbers and addresses and birthdays and the age of all your friends, clothing sizes of yourself and your significant other. So there's a lot of stuff out there, right? That we kind of think that we know all these things, but of course we really don't, right? And it's interesting. This is a wonderful example of technology trying to fix something, but not fully succeeding, right? For example, I'm sure you've been to places where they have these requirements on passwords, right? So it needs to contain an upper letter and a lower letter and a special character and a number digit and something. It needs to be at least this long. And interestingly, you find that as these password requirements become more and more complex, in the end, these systems oftentimes, not necessarily, but oftentimes actually become less secure. Why do you think that is? Do you have a hypothesis why that could happen? Marco, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that since they become more complex, they are more difficult to remember, which means that, for example, let's say I need to have a passport which is very complex to the point I cannot even remember it anymore. So I will write it down somewhere, which means that, yeah, that is a problem. And that means that that thing, like for example, let's say I wrote it in a notebook or something. So I have to hide the notebook, or let's say encrypt in my own way the password that is in the notebook. And then there are two problems. First, I have to remember where the notebook is, and second, I have to know how I encrypted it, so to speak, in my own way.
Yeah, that's exactly the challenge, right? As these things get complex, you can have a super complex password, but then you need to externalize it. You are effectively putting knowledge, you're moving knowledge from the head into the world, right? That's exactly what's going on in these particular cases. Melanie, did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I would also argue that the more constraints the website puts on the password, that's also information the attacker could use. Like if the attacker knows there's at least one uppercase letter or one number or whatever, that also applies to him attacking and not just, yeah.
Interesting point. Yeah, that's an interesting, I guess, statistical study hidden behind this somehow to figure out what that actually tells attackers about the words. All right, good. So knowledge in the world has a couple characteristics, just so that this is perfectly clear. Knowledge in the world is great because you don't have to remember it, right? It's out there. It's the labels on your keyboard, for example. But it's only there while you see it. You can't really touch type and get really fast and look at a document where you're copying some stuff if you are if you need to glance down to your keys. Knowledge in the world is especially tricky for things that are not super important to you, because you tend to then just forget about it. So, you know, having a list in your drawer of all the birthdays of your friends or a file on your computer is great, but unless you really care about these friends and you're really behind, you know, you trying to track all these birthdays, you're probably going to forget about them. The solution, of course, is then reminders, right? And reminders are a wonderful example. You could put something into a paper agenda, and then if it's important enough for you, or because you have a good routine of it, you're going to regularly look at it. But today we're not really doing that, right? Today we're using online agendas and schedulers and date planners, and those guys can remind us, right? There will be an alarm going off, and that's a perfect example of externalizing something and then making sure that it reminds you. Funnily enough, you may have noticed this. Your watch or your phone goes off, and it will tell you, if you were to look at it, it would tell you, oh, you know, the class is beginning or something, this class. But you actually don't need to look, right? Because the moment the signal goes off, the alarm goes off, you're like, oh, right, it's class in 15 minutes, right? Without actually looking at it, because you know that something was coming up, and this is triggering you to remember that that was going on. So oftentimes it's enough to just have the ping, and then the information itself is actually available to you in your own memory, in your knowledge in the head, but it needs to be triggered at the right amount of time. So the signal kind of triggers the message itself, if you want. This externalization, by the way, completely random tangent here, but one of the best techniques to get to reduce stress in your life is to begin to externalize all these things that you're supposed to keep in your head, all the commitments you've made to other people. Yeah, I'm going to call you next week. Yeah, I'm going to see you, and I'm going to work on that piece of code for our assignment. Right? Yes, I'm going to read these 15 pages in the book until next week. Write down these things and put them in a list, and look at that list regularly. Once a day even is enough, and you will find much stress relieved from your life. That's the basic principle behind the getting things done philosophy of organizing to-do items. Very worth looking at it. GTD for short. All right. End of tangent. If we compare the working knowledge, the knowledge in the world in the head, we see that in the world, it's available as soon as it's there. You don't need to learn it. It, however, has a fairly low efficiency because you need to look at it, interpret it, and read it every time. So the initial usability is high, right? A keyboard with labels on it is very easy to start to pick up and use. But the aesthetics are sometimes tricky, right? So something that is all strewn with labels and explanations looks very busy and not very elegant and can be a little unsettling and even overwhelming at times. Remember that we can, however, use natural mappings to get rid of a lot of those labels, right? Natural mappings are a great panacea, if you want, because they both remove the learning need and they also remove the need for labels. The other option is, of course, to move knowledge in the head as a user. I can try to just remember stuff. That means it's less available than in the world, and that makes it less suitable for beginners because they didn't have time to learn it, obviously, and to put it in their head. It's also harder to learn than something that is out there in the world where I just need to look at it and memorize the pattern I'm seeing. But it can be highly efficient, right? And it is also through using fewer labels, it is essentially invisible. That can be a good thing from an aesthetic point of view, but it can be a bad thing from a usability and discovery point of view. I mean, I hate the fact that we're getting more and more gestures overloaded onto the various screen sides and directions of our smartphones, where you have to, okay, I have to swipe this way from not quite the top, but only up to the center and then let go, and then something particular happens. Completely invisible. Not a great design unless you use it every day, several times, and really can get it into your head. Another example that I think is interesting, in courtrooms, when you're in a US courtroom, there are stenographers there who are taking notes. They're actually typists. They type, and they type on a particular kind of keyboard that is a 5-finger keyboard where you press multiple keys at the same time. And these keyboards are not labeled because the combination of fingers on the keyboard, according keyword is the word for this, is actually triggering whole parts of words or even sentences and so on. But they are super fast. They're super fast. They can actually keep up with a heated conversation inside the courtroom. And for legal reasons, this kind of transcription was required for the longest time. So here, the unlabeled, pro keyboard makes total sense because this person will do nothing else but use this to type really, really fast. A bad example is, having a cool device that has only minimalistic labeling, right? That is a bad design because it basically throws away usability at, to serve some aesthetic needs. And every time we pick up something, we have an option. We can learn how to use it and memorize it, or we can use the labels that are available. And as a designer, you also have a choice every time you do something. Do I ask the user to learn this by heart, or do I provide them with a visible cue how to do it? Right? That's the question. Do I invent a weird gesture to delete files in my little browser app, or do I give them a delete button or function somewhere that they can reveal and find? Now, related to our limited working memory is also the fact that we have a hard time navigating certain decision structures, and we have an easy time navigating others. A decision structure basically means the number of steps I need to take down a tree, basically a decision tree, to arrive at a conclusion. You're walking into an ice cream parlor, for example, and there's 57 varieties of ice cream out there at the back. That's a lot of choice. It's a very broad tree, but it's also very shallow. You only need to make one decision, one of the 57, and you're done, right? That's okay. Another example is a cookbook. A cookbook will have a long sequence of things you need to do, but there is still, you don't need deep thinking because it takes you through each step, and at each point, the decision you make is very easy, right? There's only one or two things that you need to decide on. A similar example is starting your car. It's actually a sometimes more complex sequence, but it is a clearly defined sequence. So we don't have trouble remembering how to do that. Another example is motorway exits. Motorway exits are actually an interesting design. If you pay attention to it, you will find that first time you see a sign, it'll have fairly detailed information onto where this exit will take you. But then as you get very close to the exit, there is less information. And there's a good reason for that. The designers of the system said, at the point when you are at only 250 meters away from this exit, we don't want you to start pondering whether you want to take a detour via Cologne or not. We're just going to tell you the exit is coming up. If you don't know whether you should be taking it, just be safe and keep driving. Right? So there's careful design that goes into these decisions. When we get into trouble is when decision structures are both wide and deep at the same time. So one example is a game like chess, for example, right? Now, of course, that was designed to occupy the mind, right? At any step in a chess game, I have hundreds of choices of what I can do. So that makes a whole party of chess, a whole game of chess, of course, really, really complex as a decision tree. But it was designed to be that way, right? It should occupy the mind. Now, you don't want to design your user interfaces to occupy the mind, hopefully, right? That's not the idea. So try to go for either shallow or narrow decision structures in your interface. We should also be clear that there are two ways in which you think about stuff. The subconscious thought, which is the one that you do when you're walking, for example, or taking a stairs, you don't think about your steps, right? They just happen. It's effortless. It's associative. You do this with pattern matching. You see stairs, you walk up them. Conscious thought is like figuring out how much is 373 times 12. That takes conscious thought. It's slow, it's serial, and it's demanding. And one of the most important words here is serial. We need to understand that humans can effectively only think consciously about one thing at a time. I can't stress this enough because there is wide misconception about this. As a human being, you can only think consciously about one thing at a time. People think they're multitasking, but what they're really doing is rapid task switching. And just with rapid task, as with rapid task switching on a computer, it means I'm processing one thing for a time, then I move to the other one, I process that for a time, I move back to the first one. Every time I do that, there's switching costs. You've probably learned about this in operating system lectures or networking. Right? The same switching cost exists when you do this as a human. Every time you switch from one conscious task to another one, you pay a price. You have to resort yourself. You have to reorganize your memory about this. You have to memorize what was I doing? What was I going to do? It's expensive. So don't design interfaces or expect people to multitask. It's a myth. It doesn't actually exist. There was I think 65-year-old researcher who gave a talk at a conference the other day about this, and he said, just to make this perfectly clear, I'm going to say it in strong words, people cannot fucking multitask. And then he got the audience's attention. So I hope I'm getting this too. So be aware of that. Multitasking is not really happening the way that we think it happens. All right, so now feedback. Feedback is whatever, our nervous system is equipped with feedback mechanisms, right? We touch stuff and we immediately feel that we touch something. Any slight delay in there will feel that things are disconnected. We already learned that with Bloch's law. We said, if we get delays that get close to the 100 milliseconds, then most people will consider this already a disconnect. The problem starts actually earlier than that. And feedback is what generally communicates to the user what is the current state of the system, what are the outcomes of actions, and did they succeed or fail? And also, good feedback will be, first of all, immediate, so happening the moment you press it, the system starts reacting visibly, or perceivably. Could be audio, it could be haptic. The feedback needs to be informative and clear, of course, right? You want to know what the feedback means. The blinking light on the printer is an example for not so great feedback, right? In that respect. you want the right amount of feedback. What that means is too much feedback will just overwhelm the user. Imagine I had a, at a word processor, or Microsoft Word, every time you press the letter, a little dialog box pops up and says, you pressed the letter E. I'm going to insert that into your text. Is that okay? And then you press OK. That will become old very, very quickly, right? We don't want that. So that's too much. It's enough to have the feedback that the letter appears at the position where the cursor currently is. On the other hand, if you're about to delete your hard drive, you want some feedback about the impending action happening, probably some safety, cautionary words about what you're about to do. So feedback needs to be sorted by in these different levels of, very small feedback very often, and then large chunks of feedback occasionally when major events are happening. Here's a little in-class exercise for you. Since you're sitting at home, you can probably do that with your own objects that you've got around you. Think about a couple of your everyday objects that you have around you, and what kind of audio, so acoustic feedback, they are giving you. So this is not so much about intentional acoustic feedback that was designed into knowledge, but just the feedback that it gives you because you're using it. Anybody has some examples of this? Yeah, Janos, go ahead.
Well, just my desk allows me to put things on it, and I know that I've securely put them down just by listening. I don't even look if I have like a cup in my hand. I just place it down and I hear a small thud, and I'm like, oh, good. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. The important part is this small thud, right? That tells you, okay, I hit the desk surface, everything's fine. We had Yanvi up here as well.
Yeah. When I leave the room and lock the door, so there is sound that I get to know, yeah, it's properly locked now.
Yes, exactly. And sorry, Janvi, your name is so close to my first name that I keep calling you Janvi. I'm going to try to get rid of that. Shalish, we got you up here.
Yeah, so one of the acoustic feedbacks that I usually get from a laptop is my fan spinning really rapidly. So yeah, so whenever it speeds up, I know that it's processing some heavy load. So I should probably be a little more patient and careful about what I'm doing.
Excellent example. Yeah, my fan is spinning loudly right now too. So I'm getting that same feedback here. We got Marco up there. So
simply walking in shoes. I mean, the shoes themselves give us acoustic feedback.
Yep, yeah, and that's a very complex feedback. There's acoustic, but there's also haptics, of course, involved. You're feeling what ground you're walking, and you can tell very quickly if you stepped on like a wet leaf or something, that a lot of things happen at the same time that tell you this. Okay, so in the everyday objects, lots of examples are that people often bring up, things like the pen cap when you close your pen, or the hard drive spinning. You mentioned the fan there, or a bike lock. Yeah, I think you mentioned the door lock. Yeah, bike lock is similar. It snaps into place, and you don't need to look, right? You know it's secure. Car doors closing properly. Or even things, those are all things that do their feedback as part of their natural operation, right? Nobody designed the sound in there explicitly to be there. You can not have the sound in a way. Now this gets into a gray area with the car door, because as I said, people are designing the sound that the car makes when you close the door. But still, it's a sound that's a result of the physical operation of it. Now, with other things like the telephone ringing, or software beeping at you, or giving you, acoustic ding dongs when somebody's sending you a message, that is designed feedback, right? That is designed acoustic feedback that wouldn't have to be there. It's there because somebody thinks it's a good idea. So just be aware of these differences. We're going to get back to that next semester. If you attend DIS2, we're going to talk a lot about acoustic and also haptic feedback. So sound is a very unique information channel. It's omnidirectional, which is both a blessing and a curse, of course. So everybody will hear it in the room, which sometimes is what you want, sometimes it's not what you want. And if you use sound in your applications, you should really use it to not just play the sound for nothing, but it should convey some meaning, right? So try to make it so that people can derive something more than just the signaling component from it. For example, when I have my Maps app running and my watch is sort of giving me little haptic or acoustic feedback signals, I can tell from the kind of acoustic signal I'm getting whether I need to take a right turn, a left turn, or go straight. As I said, this is going to come up more in DIS2. Here's another one on visibility. Visibility, of course, is a big part of the feedback question, right? So feedback needs to be visible, as we said when we introduced this concept of feedback. And this is my coffee maker at home, and it has an on-off switch, but it's on the back, right? It's back here behind, at the back of this top part here, so you can't see it. Somebody probably thought this is very elegant, but anybody who walks into that kitchen and just wants to use this machine will be baffled for a while, right? And that puts people into this situation where they're like, getting insecure. They don't feel, competent using this machine. So that's not a good place to put people into. Another example are VCRs, right? When VCRs were still a thing, and they didn't have an on-screen programming interface that was rendered on the TV, but they had their little tiny displays down there. They needed lengthy instructions of pressing tiny little buttons on them without much visible feedback. A good display, by the way, not just with VCRs, but in general, also for your tech and your things that you're developing, any device you're developing or any service, if you have a good display around, that's a great way to improve the usability because you can increase visibility, right? And this becomes more and more feasible as technology is progressing. So for example, today, we may not even need to put displays onto everything. We can use augmented reality in our smartphones to just put information onto objects without actually the object having a display, right? Which is rendered on top of it. Here's another example of visibility and feedback. This is the Giulietta by Alfa Romeo that was introduced many years ago. And do you notice anything that could pose a difficulty about this car upon first using it? Yeah, Felix, go ahead.
I think the door handle for the rear doors is next to the window instead of downwards.
Yes,
like it is on the front.
Exactly. And I can tell you, this is already a very, very user-friendly picture of this car. Normally, when you walk up to it from the side, you would not be looking at it this way. There's no way to find that handle, right? So somebody clearly, went aesthetics first and usability second. Or you could say, somebody put form over function, which is not a good idea, if you ask me, because I mean, aesthetics are not always a bad goal. Don't get me wrong, right? They're a great goal. But imagine, you buy this car and the dealer explains to you, oh, by the way, you got to open the rear door with this weird handle here, and you have a good laugh at it, and you're good. You understood it, right? You probably will struggle with it a few times, but then you're okay. But then you drive home, and next morning, you want to load your family into the car. And you're like, okay, get in, everybody. You stop, maybe at a place where where it's hard to stop for a long time. And they're like, yeah, but how do you open the rear door? And you're like, yeah, you got to, use that weird handle there. So that will start creating some inconveniences. Now imagine, borrowing this car to a friend who doesn't know this, right? They will actually probably be baffled for a while on how to open the rear doors. And now let's take this one step further. Let's imagine you buy this and you are a professional taxi driver. This is sort of a recipe for an unhappy life, right? Buy this car, become a taxi driver, and you're going to have a hard time every single day because everybody needs to get in the rear of the car. They will never have seen this before, and they will always say, "Oh, I can't open the door." So that's really an issue. What we're seeing here is that when you design things, you need to carefully also think about: am I designing this mostly for first-time users, or is this mostly for expert users? Right? A highly personal device like a laptop or something that you keep using every day can be pretty. You can have a learning curve, and then after a while I've gotten used to it, and it maybe unfolds particular powerful features. But things that could easily be passed on to others, or that others need to interact with, that can encounter first-time users a lot of the time, you don't want that, right? So like a ticket machine in the Hauptbahnhof, in the main station, is something that a lot of people walk up to and just need to get something done. They're always in a hurry, so you don't want them to be confused with a non-obvious interface, even though it might be a little more efficient for professional users. I already briefly mentioned feed forward. Feed forward is to execution, was what feedback is to evaluation, right? Feedback basically allows me to evaluate, right? The system gives me feedback and I can evaluate what the feedback means and whether it's what I wanted. And feed forward is what the system provides to me, such as the tangible feel of keycaps before I actually start my execution. So it's information that helps me know what I can do. It uses signifiers, it uses constraints, it uses mappings, all these things that we've already learned about. And mostly we think about it visually, like the labeling on keys, for example. But also it's also haptic, right? That's why, as I mentioned earlier today, a touchscreen interface is so tricky for touch typing. You need, as the name suggests, touch typing requires you to touch the keys and know where they are, and so you don't need to look at them. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about today is human errors. And errors are something that people make all the time using everyday objects. It's perfectly normal, right? Nothing to be ashamed of. Although people often blame themselves, which is kind of untypical. In many cases, people are like, this crappy technology, this crappy this, this crappy that. But when a mistake happens, especially with computer technology, there is a tendency to think, I'm just too stupid for this, or I'm not good with computers, or something like that. This is often happening because people have acquired what's called taught helplessness, right? They maybe took some math classes, they weren't very good at it, and then they think, I can't do math, and it was just really not explained to them in the right way. And then they think, if I can't do math, then I'm probably bad in all the natural sciences and computing anyway, anything that has to do with tech. And this is the taught helplessness that wouldn't have to be there. And this can actually lead to, this can have bad consequences, right? People who really feel insecure using technology will have learned and acquired this feeling of helplessness, and this can, lead them to feel depressed. There can often be a conspiracy of silence because nobody wants to talk about the fact that they have trouble using that, ATM down the road, right? Because, that's just me. I'm just too stupid for it. But we should be clear. People make these mistakes and they don't understand how technology works. And this is not just dumb folks, right? Not just only dumb folks have misconceptions of how everyday technology works. For example, let's take a thermostat. I think that's the example you'll find in some more detail in the book. A lot of people will think, if I want the room to heat up faster to a particular temperature, I need to crank the thermostat up all the way. Well, we know that the thermostat will basically just cut off the temperature when it has reached it, and it's not going to be any faster if you crank it up all the way. But people have a different understanding of how thermostats work, right? They don't have that understanding of this essentially, binary device where it doesn't matter how far you overshoot with the target temperature. And that's a very, very common misconception. We also have other misconceptions, right? None of us think about the fact that when an apple falls down to the ground, that there's relativity theory at play, and that time and space get warped momentarily. We don't need that, right? Newtonian physics is fine for us. It works just fine in everyday life because the speeds that we encounter don't need us to be any more precise. So they work just better in everyday life than thinking about it at a more complex level. So let's take errors apart. There are, first of all, two kinds of errors that we're going to differentiate. One is mistakes and one is slips. Mistakes happen consciously. You want to make them, basically. You know you're making them. Slips happen without you wanting to make them. And you might say, well, I never want to make a mistake, but hold on for a sec. You'll see what I mean with this. Mistakes are a result of conscious decision-making and conscious thinking. They often are, concerning major events and major actions. Now, why do they happen? Why do we make these mistakes when we think consciously? Well, because, for example, the goal could be wrong. Or the plan could be wrong to achieve that goal. Oftentimes, people leap to wrong conclusions about the conceptual model for a technology, or they assume false causalities. A great example would be, the internet stops working and somebody reboots their computer. Although if they'd glanced over at their router, they would have seen that, the cable company just dropped the line. So rebooting the computer isn't going to fix anything. So these are mistakes. And these are actually for technology, for you as a program developer, for an interface designer, if you want to detect that this is happening, this is hard. Why? Because the user is doing all the right moves to achieve a particular thing. It's just the wrong thing they are trying to achieve. And that's difficult to detect because you can't peek into their head, right? But let's stick with these mistakes for a second longer anyway. There are mistakes that happen through memory lapse. And you'll find this in Norman's book in more detail. Memory lapse basically means that your memory fails during the goal setting or during the planning stage, or also on the other side of the 7 stages of action model during the evaluation phase. So for example, let's say you've got a mechanic who's troubleshooting a device and they get momentarily distracted. And so they miss something. And the result could be mechanical failure in the device. That's a mistake happening. Another example of mistakes is another class is the knowledge-based ones. These happen because you don't know everything about the situation, and so you evaluate the situation wrongly. So, for example, you're putting your package on a scale in a DIY corner of the local post office in London, and you look at it and it says 2.8. You're like, oh, okay, so that's 2.8 kilos, so I need to put that much postage on it. But it was actually reporting the weight in pounds. You would have been fine with much less postage, right? Not a big deal. Post office is happy for you to pay more, but you made a mistake because you weren't aware that that scale was actually reporting weight in pounds instead of kilos. So how can you tell, or I'm going to give you maybe another example here. How can you tell a knowledge-based mistake? Well, a knowledge-based mistake you can recognize because after the fact, if you ask people afterwards, they will still say, well, that's exactly what I intended to do. I thought this thing was weighing in kilos, and so that's why I bought stamps for the weight in kilograms. I didn't know that it was different, so it's knowledge-based. Another one is a rule-based. You evaluate a situation correctly, but you take a wrong course of action. So, for example, you're a bouncer at a nightclub, and suddenly people start, just leaving the night, running out of the nightclub, and you just think, oh, these guys are trying to avoid payment. Well, actually, the nightclub is on fire, and these people are escaping from a fire, but you don't know that, right? Because you haven't seen or heard or felt the fire yet. So you're looking at the situation, and yes, these people are trying to get out of the nightclub, but you take the wrong action as a result because you apply the wrong rule. As with all these models, these things aren't black and white. You could also maybe shape that story as a kind of knowledge-based mistake that's happening. But the point here is that all these mistakes are happening because people take conscious decisions to do certain actions. Yeah, Marco, go ahead.
Question about this. For example, me being a nightclub bouncer. Okay, so
yeah,
how is that a correct evaluation of the situation if you have the rule of, okay, not wanting people to go through the emergency exit if they didn't pay anything? If, well, you don't know the whole situation, you don't know there's a fire. So
yeah,
how is that well, in this case, a good example of a correct evaluation of the situation? But
I see your point. Well, in a way, you as the bouncer are evaluating the situation as far as you can detect it, right? So out there in the lobby of the nightclub, maybe, the fire is noticeable and people are just, going by you swiftly, and you've seen that before, and every time you saw it, it was somebody who was trying to kind of escape his bill. So you grab these people and stop them right at the moment. That's your rule that is placed. That's why it's called rule-based. You have a rule in place for the situation that you are seeing, and yes, that person is trying to rapidly leave the club, so your rule says stop him, right? So you've correctly evaluated the situation as far as it was important for the rule, but you weren't aware of the whole story behind it, why he's escaping. There's other reasons for these people trying to get out of the nightclub, but you'll only encounter these once in your life, so they're not part of your day-to-day rule.
So to speak,
make a bit more
evaluation,
sense?
so to speak, based on how I generalize the conditions. I say if they want to leave, like in a rush, that means they're trying to avoid a payment, and not like if they're rushing, then maybe there's a fire. Okay.
Exactly. By the way, I love the idea that we are asking computer scientists to become bouncers at nightclubs here. That's such an unrealistic thing. But anyway, assuming you are, then you probably got a training on your first day, by the club owner who said, all right, Marco, you're the muscle now. Anybody trying to run out here, you stop them, right? That's probably as much as you got. So you apply that rule, but it's the wrong rule, so to say, to evoke.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Thanks.
Okay. Now, this is all the mistakes that happen consciously. And as I said, in software, there isn't that much we can do, right? We can try to be clear about what's going on, try to convey a good sense of the context of interaction and whatnot, be visible and do all the good things. But if somebody has made up their mind about doing something that is the wrong choice, that's hard to detect, because we're not the all-seeing eye, right? We can't know that they should be doing something else. All we get is key clicks and mouse clicks, right? And stuff. That's what we're seeing. We're very limited in detecting what's going on in front of the computer. Slips, that's the second kind, and that is actually much easier to detect. Slips are most of the everyday errors that you make, that you and I all make. There are small things going wrong. You formed a goal, but somehow you messed up the execution. And these are actually easy to discover most of the time. They occur mostly in skilled behavior. So but this is interesting, this is a paradox. You don't make a slip because you're unfamiliar with the situation and what to do, but you make a slip because you're so familiar with the situation and what to normally do that you don't quite, pay attention. You don't think it's worth turning on your brain in full gear. So they often happen because of lack of attention, because you're busy, or because you're tired, or because you're stressed or bored, or you just have more important things to do. So all these terrible accidents that happen when planes crash, a lot of these then are ultimately reduced down to pilot error, right? And many of these were because of one of those reasons, right? So the pilot was maybe busy, tired, stressed, bored, had something else to take care of, and because of that situation, and they make a mistake, or a slip, we should now say, that leads to a bad situation. As I said before, we can only do one conscious thing at once, and this is what triggers many slips, right? This fact that we cannot really multitask two conscious tasks at the same time. Jeff Raskin, a wonderful guy who was one of the chief designers behind the Macintosh interface when it first came out, wrote a book, The Humane Interfaces. He wrote it around 2000, so it's a classic by now in itself. And he has this wonderful example in there. He says, like, I can walk down the street. I do that subconsciously. I can eat some peanuts. I do that pretty much unconsciously. And I can solve a math problem. That will take my conscious thought. So I can do a whole bunch of things subconsciously on autopilot, and I can do one thing in my head, unconscious thought. But if then somebody stops me and asks me a question, I'm going to be out of that train of thought, and I need to task switch over to that conversation, because that requires conscious thinking. Shailesh, you had a remark. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just to understand the differences between slips and mistakes. So for example, we have an expert programmer who's debugging a specific piece of a program or a module, and he sees an error. He's extremely familiar with that error, and he takes the steps to resolve that error. But then he finds out that he has 20 more errors to look into now. So would that be an example of a slip or a mistake?
If he is planning to fix that error, but then 15 other errors kind of take him off the task and he forgets about the first one,
yeah,
that would be sort of losing the activation to following that task. So you could formulate that. I mean, we're going to see some classes of slips, and you can see for yourself whether you think it slots into one. You could interpret that as a slip. But we've also had, when we talked about mistakes earlier on, we also said that sometimes people have memory lapse, right? And so you could also say, well, if fixing that bug, since that's sort of a fairly elaborate conscious thinking task in itself, I would probably rather actually formulate it as a memory lapse mistake, because you've actually missed, you forgot that you wanted to do a major thing, basically. That would be my interpretation here. But we're going to look at the class of slips, and you can see whether that's the right way to think about it or not. Theo, go ahead.
Okay.
I had a short question regarding multitasking.
Yeah.
You said that about being serial, like we can only do one task at a time, and like we have to switch always. But with the example of eating peanuts and then drinking and then doing a math problem, so does it mean that we can only do one conscious task at a time?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if that didn't become clear. That's the whole point. Conscious thought is serial, means it can only do one thing after another. And we only have, if you want, we have one CPU that can run conscious thought. So if your brain is busy on conscious thinking, such as solving a maths problem, right, or something like that, then it cannot do another conscious thinking task at the same time. Okay, which, so by the way, so on the other hand, walking is not something, you don't go outdoors, at least I hope you don't, and say, so let's see this walking thing, I read about it, let's try this. So I guess I need to move my left foot forward and then put it down. But that's not how you walk, right? You don't think about it. You do it subconsciously. That's why I called it being on autopilot. And even eating those peanuts, chewing, swallowing, even taking them out of the bag is something that can, unfortunately, as we all know, quickly go on autopilot, right? Where you look at the bag of peanuts, it's empty, and like, how did that happen, right? But as soon as you have one conscious task, so you can have n subconscious tasks all at once. I mean, you're breathing, right? That's a subconscious task. And you can have one subconscious task. Those can all happen at one time. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. So let's break down these slips into a couple different classes. The first class is action-based, meaning you perform the wrong action. For example, you pour yourself a cup of coffee and you put some milk in, and then you open the fridge and you put the cup into the fridge. Damn it. You wanted to put back the milk, of course, in the fridge, not the coffee, but yeah, you're not quite awake yet, right? So that's action-based because you perform the wrong action. And these action-based slips, then you can further characterize them in details for capture slips, description similarity slips, and mode errors. And we're going to get into more detail about these in a minute. So we got mistakes, slips, conscious, accidental, or intentional, accidental, And then we got slips, action-based, and the second part is memory lapse. So memory fails you and the intended action is not done or its results are not evaluated. So like forgetting to lock your door when you leave the house. And inside action-based, then we have more, right? So we're going to look at these in more detail now. Action-based slips, they're fun. One type of them is the so-called capture slip. This means, I bet you've been there. You know, you get into your car, on your bike, or on the bus on a Sunday, and you wanted to drive to your sports, game, but instead you end up at work. And like, how did I end up here, right? I didn't want to go to work today, or I didn't want to go to uni today. This is because there were two action sequences that start in the same initially, you getting your bike out and getting on your bike and driving down the first road, but then differ later on. One is driving to the university, and one is driving to your sports game, your sports training. And so, because you're doing this driving to work to the university every day, hopefully being a good student, that has ingrained itself as sort of the big sort of track that your train is on, right? And so this other thing you're trying to do just gets clobbered, right? You get to go down that road, you don't really pay attention, you're kind of off, your mind is elsewhere, and you take a right, you take a left, and before you know it, you find yourself in front of the audimax, right? So the sequence that is well practiced, like biking to the university, it kind of captures the one that is unfamiliar, that you only need to do maybe today, right? I mentioned driving to work on Sunday, or you've been there as well. You borrow a pen, somebody borrows a pen, and then they write something on a piece of paper, and then they pocket the pen, and you're like, you're stealing my pen. Well, they didn't do it intentionally, at least most of them didn't. It's just because the usual move is take out your pen, write something, put it back, right? So now they borrowed a pen because they forgot their own, but it feels like the other. I'm in the middle of writing, and so the familiar practice captures the unfamiliar one. All right, so that's capture. Next up, description similarity slips, also action-based, happening in the action sequence. Your intention is not described in enough detail, and it fits two different action sequences. This often happens if similar objects are physically close to each other. For example, two switches that look the same. Or another example would be you get home from sports, you take off your shirt and you mean to throw it into the laundry basket in that corner, but instead, in your bathroom, but instead you throw it into the toilet. Why? Because both laundry basket and toilet are like these vessels on the floor with an opening at the top, right? And your brain is not quite paying attention, so you basically end up putting it there. Or I bet you've been there. I just did this the other day. You get out a couple glasses of stuff to put on your breakfast bread, and then you had your breakfast and you're trying to close them all, and you find yourself sitting there trying to screw that lid on the glass, and like after, depends on how tired you are, after 3 or 10 seconds you notice like this is not working, right? And you're like, okay, that was the wrong lid for the wrong glass, right? So again, description similarity, right? Lots of containers look the same. Or pouring orange juice into your coffee pot, right? That would be another one of those where it was a pot, it holds liquids, that was enough for your tired brain to decide to put orange juice in there. Next up, mode errors. And mode errors are one of my favorites, because mode errors they explode when you get to software-based user interfaces. They really get, there's a lot of them out there. Mode errors mean you trigger the wrong action sequence with the right gesture being a very broad term, a user action, right? Because the device that you're trying to use is actually in a different mode than what you thought it was in. So I have a little, this is a really geeky question, but I want to see if anybody's out there who gets it. Who of you has seen this letter sequence in files in their favorite text editor? A colon, a W, and a Q. Janvi, go ahead.
Yeah, in the Vim editor.
Yes, exactly. Do you want to explain what that sequence normally does?
Yeah, it's for like exiting the file.
Exactly. So thanks, Janvi, for sharing. I'm so glad there's still somebody out there who uses, 80s text editors. It's amazing. Vim is a favorite text editor, a really like low-level text-based editor for Unix systems. You can probably bring it up on your console if you have a Unixy system. It's based on VI, and what VI has is it's an editor that has modes. And when you start VI, you can't just start typing text like you would expect in a text editor. No, you have to enter the insert mode by pressing the I key. So when you press the I key, at that moment, the system is in a command mode. So you press the I key and it moves into insert mode. Then you can start typing text. Now, to get out of that mode, you have to press a key, typically escape. That takes you back into the command mode. And once you've pressed that, you can press the colon mode, which then lets you type more complex commands like W for writing the file to disk and Q for quitting VI or Vim. But if you do that without escaping, so you just type your text and you forget to move into the command mode, you're still in insert mode. So instead, this letter sequence just gets added to your buffer, to your file, right? Okay, so that was a lengthy explanation about a very old Unix program. Try it out. Start Vim or VI on a console someday and play around with it. It'll drive you nuts unless you read the manual. And it's because it has these modes, right? Modern editors try to avoid this, right? Most modern programs try to avoid this wherever possible. But to give you a more modern example, Photoshop has lots of modes. The moment you pick a tool, I mean, I don't know whether you've done this before, but I've worked with Photoshop or some drawing app, filled a couple areas with a fill bucket, and then I wanted to really, place some carefully positioned dots in a picture, right? So I get distracted because somebody calls or something. I turn back and I move my mouse to this place where I want to place a tiny little dot, and boom, the whole area is filled because I still have the fill tool on, right? That's a mode error. Photoshop misinterpreted my gesture of trying to place a single pixel dot because it was in the mode for filling areas instead. So whenever a device or software resorts, and resorts means it couldn't find any other cleverer way of handling this, it resorts to modes to cope with more functions than it has controls. For devices, this is pretty easy to understand. If you have a clock, for example, then you need a button for adjusting the hours and the minutes, right? And you need to move them up or down. So that would be one button for hours up, one button for hours down, one button for minutes up, one button for minutes down. Now I built myself a clock that has all these buttons because I'm a nerd. But most clocks that you buy actually only have a button that goes up and down, and somehow with some other mode button you need to toggle that until it actually controls the hours or minutes to set. So that's an example for devices, right? More buttons than or more controls buttons than functions. More functions than controls. That's usually an indicator that there will be some kind of mode switch somewhere, and that often really makes usability tank. In software, it's trickier because how are you going to work around the fact that Photoshop needs tools to do different things? It's really hard. You can't get around having these different modes. That you would have to have literally a different kind of mouse for painting and a different mouse for filling and a different mouse for drawing lines, a different input device on your table, and that's kind of difficult. So what often is done instead is that this mode switch happens by picking a tool in the Photoshop toolbar, and then you are in the mode of filling areas, and that's often indicated because your cursor changes into a different tool. The fact that these errors still happen, these mistakes or these slips, I should say, still happen, show us that even though the tool is displayed right where the user should be looking when they're placing a point, it still happens. So we are seeing the tool, but our mind isn't tuned into it. They're not paying attention to the shape of the cursor because we're so taken up in designing our picture. This is probably the most prominent problem in many user interfaces that use software as a part of a device or as a pure app. Another example that I just want to share is early Unix desktops had a function where you could turn your that was called kill window, and you picked the kill window function from a toolbar, and then your cursor turned into a little skull. And as long as it was in the skull form and you were in the kill window mode, any window you clicked on was just, the process was killed. No saving, it was just gone. Very powerful, very convenient, but also super dangerous. Modern systems do this differently for a reason. They typically let you first select an object like a window, for example, by right-clicking it, and then they give you a choice to choose the kill command once. This is way safer because we first say, this is the object I want to act on, and then I issue the kill command. And the moment it has been issued, I'm no longer in a kill mode, right? The system will no longer kill any windows that I click on. So that's the safer design. It's called the object action sequence instead of an action object sequence. All right, we have a little bit more to say about slips and mistakes, but I think in the interest of time, Ollie, I would say we leave that for next week, and we're going to conclude with these slips. We have a few more in-class exercises that I want to take some time with doing, and we'll wrap this up next week. Now, for now, what you should know is that we are rapidly approaching the end of the book, so the Norman book. So keep reading, and I've got a wonderful little arrow dialog here that I want to show you. This is a dialog box from the image burn program on Windows, showing you a great example on how not to handle errors. It's kind of like basically yelling at the user, I'll do this automatically this time, but don't do it again. That's terrible design, right? Don't deal with errors this way. We're going to talk more about error design next week, but I wanted to share that what you should be doing is you should be reading Norman's book at least until page 216, right? This is where we will leave it for the moment, and then we will come back to the topics in Norman's book later in the class when we talk about the design process. This is another section that Norman added to his book recently. Well, recently with this 2012 edition, not with the original 80s, 90s text. And we'll pick up there a little later in the class. As a reminder, we looked at mistakes, the intentional errors that people make when the plan is basically the wrong one, when they have a goal that isn't actually what they should be doing, or what they were intending to do. And now we're going to move to the ones that are actually much easier for us to detect within the software, which is slips. So slips are mistakes that happen involuntarily. So after a slip happened, you would typically say as a user, oh, I didn't mean to do that. We looked at a couple of these, but to give you some examples, the slips can be based on performing a wrong action, just to continue the discussion from last time. So slips happening on the wrong action means, for example, you're taking a cup of coffee and you're taking some milk out, and then you place the cup back into the fridge instead of the milk carton. Action-based slips, where the wrong action happens, again, fall into a couple different parts: capture slips, description similarity slips, and mode errors. Mode errors being especially relevant for HCI. Memory lapse is the other type of slips or class of slips, and they mean that your memory fails you, and what you do isn't done. What you were intending to do is either not done, or the evaluation isn't happening correctly. For example, you leave the house and you forget to lock the door, right? That just basically slipped your memory, slipped your mind, and you just forgot to do that, although you intended to do it. So you can see the difference here between action-based and memory lapse-based slips. Those are the two classes. Again, Norman breaks these down in a little bit more detail in his book in chapter 5. Now, action-based, to look at a little bit more detail here, could be capture slips, two action sequences that are similar in the beginning, but the later sequence differs. Typical case where you have a well-practiced routine and you now do something that starts with the moves, you know, the actions of that well-practiced routine, but you really intend to do something else following. And the well-practiced routine sort of captures the unfamiliar one, the new one that you're doing. So driving to work on a Sunday, or taking the bus and getting off at the Audimax on Sunday when you were really meant to go somewhere else. Or somebody pocketing a borrowed pen. They don't do that because they're evil. They just basically made the mistake of basically every time they usually take out a pen, they do something with it, put it back into the pocket. So now that they got a pen from somebody else, they will just pocket it because that's the practiced conclusion of that action sequence working with that pen. Now, description similarity slips are when the intention isn't described in enough detail and fits two different action sequences. This often happens when objects are physically close to each other, like two switches that look the same. Or you walk into your dorm room and you take off your shirt after sports and you throw it into the toilet instead of the laundry basket because they're both openings that you notice and that look sort of good enough for throwing an object into them. Or putting a lid onto the obviously wrong container. Taking out the two different kinds of jam in the morning and then trying to screw the jam lid on the wrong pot. Or pouring yourself an orange juice into your coffee pot because coffee pot was close enough to being a glass, and in your morning haze you didn't notice that this was actually the wrong container. We have mode errors as the case, and we've been over these, so I'm going to go quickly just to remind you, where you trigger the wrong action because the device is in a different mode than what you originally expected. So, for example, this write quit example we talked about, that triggers when somebody puts that into their VI editor buffer because they didn't notice that they were actually still in text entry mode rather than in command mode. This often happens when systems basically try to put more functions into the system than you have controls available in the interface, and then that's when you typically end up in modes. But also, when Siri or Alexa asks you back something, whatever, drive me to Bob, and it says which Bob, then at that point it expects a particular name and it's not expecting normal commands. So that's also a mode, and a mistake can easily happen that way too. As I said, mode errors are the most prominent ones in many software user interfaces. Here's an example with the password entry, right? You know that oftentimes systems ask you to enter your password, and oftentimes people fail to do that because they didn't notice that the caps lock key was on. The caps lock key is a wonderful example of a mode. You can press the caps lock key and that puts your entire keyboard into a different mode because now it will enter uppercase characters rather than lowercase characters when you press a letter key. And that's a mode, right? The system reacts to the same user input, the user gesture, as we like to say. Gesture in this case doesn't mean you waving around with your hands, it's just anything you do. It reacts to that same gesture in a different way. And modes are almost unavoidable in computer systems because we've got so much functionality crammed into this little box or this little device in front of us. But the problem with modes really starts when they are not easily visible. So for example, that's why for many years now, but this didn't always used to be the case, you will see this tiny little indicator here at the right-hand side of the password field that shows you that, hey, by the way, you've got caps lock on. And that might help you to notice this rather than trying to type in your password 10 times and failing because you didn't notice that caps lock was actually engaged. Another example is Photoshop, where every time you pick a new tool, you actually enter a different mode, right? You pick a fill tool, and then everywhere you click, it will fill the area with the color that you selected. And so that's a mode, right? That means that now the mouse click that used to be, for example, selecting an object is now fill this area. And how does Photoshop illustrate this? Well, by changing the cursor, right? The cursor changes subtly into something else, so that hopefully, because you might be looking at it when you're trying to aim at a particular point and click at it, you will notice that it's a different shape. Studies show, however, by the way, that this actually doesn't work too well. Even though the cursor changes, even though it's right in front of people, they will still make mode errors. So there's something else going on there where your attention isn't really at this cursor and at the shape of this cursor, even though it is right in front of you and it is where you are acting. It's a peculiarity that Jeff Raskin has studied a little more in his book, The Humane Interface. It's a great read, by the way, by the guy who co-designed the Mac user interface back in the day. And he found that these kinds of different shapes for tools actually don't work very well. Another example in the X Windows environment under Unix and Linux, there is in some desktop editors or desktop environments, there's a special mode that you can put your cursor into, which is the kill window mode, right? So that changes your cursor into a tiny little skull and crossed bones, and anywhere you click after that, that window will immediately get killed as a Unix process without saving anything. Again, that's a mode. It's a pretty drastic mode, to be honest, because if you forget that that's on because you got distracted, somebody called you over to their desk and you do help them something, you come back and you click on a window to bring it to the foreground to continue working on your thesis, and boom, you just killed your text editor window and you didn't save it before. That can lead to much aggravation. So we try to avoid modes when we can. We can't always avoid them as software designers, but if we do have them, we should make very clear that they're engaged and which mode the system's currently in. Now, memory lapse slips are a very common cause for errors as well. They're caused by interruptions through other people or devices, and that means that you will forget to complete some action sequence, right? So I wonder whether that's ever happened to you. You're in your living room and you walk over to your bedroom because you wanted to do something there, and you get to your bedroom and you're like, wait, what was I supposed to be doing here? It's funny how that works, right? You just thought about what you were going to do, and then you walked 5 meters and you forgot about it. Happens to everybody. And the interesting thing here is that we can actually recover from this, right? What do? We often walk back to the original room, and that reminds us of the intention that we actually had. Oh yeah, I was gonna get my scissors from the bedroom because I needed to cut something. And then you can walk back to the bedroom and do it, right? So you can see your mind at work trying to recover from these little failures that are perfectly normal and everyday events. Sometimes these things also happen, and that's something Norman doesn't talk about in much detail, but I want to add that to the list here because I think it's an important one for us as interface designers. Sometimes a memory lapse can happen because the main part of a goal has been accomplished. So in this case, for example, you might find that you walk up to the ATM and you want to get some money. So you put your card in, you put in a PIN, the money, you put in the amount, the money comes out. And people would often walk away from the ATM because they got their money. This was what they came to do, right? That was the main goal, the main part of the goal. They never had the intentional goal of putting their card in and retrieving it again, because that's just a mechanic that needs to happen in order for that other thing to get the money. And so what do ATMs do? Well, they typically will give back the card first and then will return the money. Why? Because they know that otherwise you're going to walk you're going to walk off after you got your money, and then everybody's going to have a lot of hassle to get that card back to their rightful owner. Another example, don't know whether you've been through that, but if you've ever photocopied something and left the original in the copier, that's the exact same case, right? You went there to get a photocopy, you got the photocopy, you happily retrieve the photocopy, you walk off, you leave your original in the copier, because retrieving that original was not something that you had on your mind as your main goal. Your main goal was to get a copy. So how can we minimize these memory lapse errors or these memory lapse slips? Well, we can reduce the number of required steps just so that there's less of a chance of somebody having that one part slip from memory before they're done. We can provide reminders of the steps. For example, as ATMs tell you, don't forget to retrieve your card. Or you can apply forcing functions, which is also what ATMs do. For example, they will not give you back the card. Sorry, they won't give you the money until you have actually pulled the card out of the ATM, right? And that makes it pretty safe to make sure that you don't forget it. But oftentimes you will see a sign next to the photocopier, don't forget your originals. That's exactly a reminder of all the steps, that I'm talking about here. Okay, let's do a quick in-class exercise here. I would like you to think about slips that happen to you. And I would like to also have you think about what type they might have been. So we've talked about 4 types here. The capture one, like the one where you're driving to work on a Sunday, where the familiar procedure captures the one-time thing that you were actually planning to do. Description similarity, where things just look the same, and so your definition of the action sequence wasn't precise enough in your head to do it right. It got confused and was applied to the wrong object, for example. Mode errors, very prominent in software user interfaces. We talked about VI at length. Or the memory lapse ones, where you basically forget part of the action sequence, for example, because the main goal has been achieved, like in the ATM. So just spend a minute, think of 3 examples, and then we'll have a self-help group here where everybody can talk about the stupid little mistakes they make in everyday life, just so that you notice that you're not the only person. This is perfectly human and perfectly normal, and is part of just how the human brain works and copes with reality. All right, Amit, do you want to start us off with an example?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it happened to me like 10 minutes back. I have to go to city center for some work and I wanted to check the bus timings. So I picked up my phone, but there was an email notification. I just checked the email and put the phone back. I didn't check the bus timings.
Yes.
Then after 5 minutes, I remembered I have to check the bus timings.
Totally got distracted there, right? By something else going on. What do you think? What kind of would it fit easily into one of these kinds here?
Maybe memory lapse.
Yeah, I think
because while I was checking the email, I forgot completely about what I was supposed to do.
Right, exactly. Good. That's a great one. I hadn't thought about this, but that's a very common thing with multi-purpose devices like a smartphone, where if you want to do just one thing, but because the device supports a million things, you get down a rabbit hole, and before you know it, you're answering a post on Facebook. Right. Thank you. Anybody else? Now's the time to share the heroic stories of your most epic failures in everyday life. Yes, the person with the wonderful name B023.
Oh yeah, that might still be from an exam.
Okay.
For me, it's a memory lapse. It's when I'm at home and cooking on the kitchen. I have a stove, and when you put like a pot or a pan on there, and I go to cook something, I think it's pretty much very similar to the ATM, where I want to make some food, but I don't think about the act of turning the stove on. Meaning that when I leave and I have my food, I sometimes catch myself not checking whether I turned the stove off, which is extremely dangerous. And what's interesting for me is this isn't aided by the fact that normally on a stove you have like red lamps which indicate which of the plates are hot, so that doesn't happen. Those don't work properly. Some of them are just still on, even at like room temperature. So it like doesn't help me, this indicator, even though there was probably exactly this thought behind it.
Good one. Yeah, that's first of all, yes, you're absolutely right. That's the typical memory lapse one. And the second one is this coping strategy didn't quite work out because probably the sensors were designed in an oversensitive way so that they're turned on so long for such a long time that you kind of you forget about them, or you start ignoring them because they're on all the time anyway. They're not just on when there's real danger. Good one, thank you.
Yeah, exactly, and it's quite dangerous when you forget to turn the stove on and it doesn't achieve the fact it doesn't properly tell you if you have left it on.
Yeah,
even
definitely.
if you walk by it later.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay, Luna, go ahead.
Hi. I just thought of another example for a mode, I think. Basically, when you have like two screens, like I do at my PC, I often like click in one window in one application and then try to type something while I'm thinking I'm in another one. Like, I don't know, I'm watching a lecture and trying to take notes on another screen, but I don't really remember which application I'm in right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
I just start typing while not really looking, and 2 minutes later I'm like, huh, where did all that go?
Excellent example. Yeah, that happens all the time. Even in Zoom here, there's this push to talk system, right, where you can hold down the space key and unmute yourself momentarily. But that used to only work when Zoom was actually in the foreground. In any other app, you would just enter lots of spaces into any documents you were writing, trying to unmute yourself. So yeah, those are perfect examples of mode errors that really are just abundant in software user interfaces, especially when you're multitasking between apps. Shalish, go ahead.
Hello, morning. So one of the things that happened to me was that I usually go grocery shopping in the Netto nearby. So I wanted to go grocery shopping to the railway that is also nearby. So even though I wanted to go to the railway, I somehow ended up in the Netto.
Yeah, Netto will love that story, by the way. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good example. If that's the usual place you go to, and your mind is sort of occupied with something else. Remember that we can only do one conscious thing at a time, right? So walking to the supermarket has probably become something that you're doing on autopilot, and that's why this happens, right? Because it's not something where you are making a plan to go to Rewe, and mapping it all out and all that. It's something just supermarket as usual. And then that's the moment when these slips kick in. So they don't kick in when we do something that we really prepare for and think about very hard. They happen exactly in these everyday situations when we're not paying attention, because we shouldn't have to, really. Kevin.
Hi. Very similar thing to what Shalish said. I once moved to another apartment, and after school I wanted to go home and just went to the older apartment straight with my boss, and
Yep.
realized afterwards that I moved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a perfect one. Yeah, that's also a typical one where it's capturing you, because that's how you get home, right? And Alisa, we'll take yours as the last one.
Morning. Yeah, I always cook fried eggs in the morning, and even today there was such situation when I put the shell of the egg on the frying pan and threw out the egg itself.
So, okay, so what do you think happened there? Which kind of mistake do you think that is?
I think it was capture, because I'm doing it every day and I was just too sleepy, maybe.
I'm not sure. Capture would mean that you were planning to do something different today.
Then it's description similarity.
That sounds to me more likely, yeah.
Okay.
Because the eggshells and the inside of the egg, or the whole egg, are similar enough as object to throw into trash as part of my morning routine making eggs. That's probably what happened there. Great, wonderful examples. Thank you, guys. So moving on with these errors, how do we detect them? As I said, to detect slips is easier than detecting mistakes, but it does require visible feedback. A great example is, you're sitting in Norman tells this wonderful story where you're sitting in a car, you're driving along, and then you're stopping, and the driver says to the passenger, "Hey, can you adjust the window, please? And the passenger, well, moves the window up, closes it or opens it, and the driver is like, no, adjust the window. What do you mean? I'm adjusting the window. And after a while, they realized that what the driver really was meant to say was adjust the car, right? Sorry, adjust the mirror. Here I am messing this up myself. So adjust the mirror was what the driver was trying to say. So what happens there is that the driver just says something that is off, right? But because it now depends on how well the person in the passenger seat reacts to that, whether they get this resolved, right? Because the driver is not easily coming out of this mistake. But if the passenger says, well, I am adjusting the window, do you really want me to move the window up and down? And that's probably when the driver then starts thinking more consciously about their question, their request, and say, oh no, sorry, I meant the mirror, of course, right? Or they say something like, you mean this thing here, right? And then they move the window up and down. So that's a good way of addressing that. Action-based slips are actually easier to detect than memory lapses because the feedback is very tangible, right? You can really see what's going on when you have an action-based slip. And mistakes are much harder to detect than all these slips because there's nothing that will signal you a wrong goal, right? The goal is something you come up with in your head, and only after you complete it all, your whole sequence, you may realize that, oh, that's actually not what I intended to do to start out with. What's challenging with detecting and then helping with the recovery from errors is finding the right level at which we should correct. There is a working hypothesis, I should maybe call it, that suggests that maybe we're doing this bottom up, our own error recovery. As an example, you walk up to a car and you can't really unlock it, right? So you fail to unlock it. So first thing you try is you try again, right? Because your key may just have gotten in there badly. Okay, so that doesn't work. So then you take your key out, you turn it around, right? And you try it again in a different way. Still doesn't work. You look at your key more closely. Am I using the wrong key here, or do I need to use another one from my keychain? No, it's still the right key. And only after doing all these things, which are kind of like a bottom-up recovery, right? You realize, you look at the car more closely. Oh, that's actually not my car. So because what you can see from this description, which is a fairly common way of recovering from these things, is we try to fix very simple things about the mistake or the result first, and then we back up and we go like, oh, maybe I failed in a more in a grander way by actually choosing the wrong car to unlock here in the first place. And as I already mentioned before, confirmations are very unlikely to actually catch errors. We've all seen these things like remove the file so-and-so.txt, right? If those come up, the first time you see this kind of request, you will react, right? It will be new for you because you just typed in remove, and it asks you back, do you really want to remove this? Whether it's on a command line or whether it's on a graphical user interface, we always have these warnings. And these confirmation dialogues, at the very first time, they work because they're new and interesting and something you hadn't seen before, and so you will pay attention. But if you've done this 50 times, you're not going to pay attention to the confirmation dialogue anymore. We've all been there, right? We get used to delete an object, we type, we hit the delete key, and then we press the Y key to confirm, right? Delete and Y, delete and Y, delete and Y for yes. And so that becomes a single gesture in your mind. You're not stopping and thinking before you confirm. That's why confirmation dialogues, just like the heat indicator on the stove that you were mentioning before, we dumb down, right? We basically start ignoring them after a while. We get used to them. That's how our brain works. It's not because we're bad people. It's because our brain tries to deal with reality. And reality is that we're seeing 50 times the same thing and we're doing the same response. Of course, we learn the response. That's how our brain is built, right? That's what we should be doing. And then if that one file comes up that you shouldn't be deleting, of course, you're in trouble. And that's why, you know, this confirmation dialog is difficult, right? That's not helpful. What is better to do is to have something like a soft reversible action. For example, every time you want to delete something, you just throw it into the trash can on your desktop. And that works every time. You don't need to stop and think about it, and you don't get confirmation dialogues that just get in your way. But if you ever notice that, oh, I shouldn't have thrown that away, you can then retrieve it, right? That's how the trash can works. And that's a little bit of a better solution than this confirmation dialog. So an undo is always a better way to help people recover from errors than a confirmation dialog, and then have the unchangeable consequence applied to the system. Okay. So there is a paradox here, because a lot of times we try to automate, right? We try to help deal with these kinds of mistakes and reduce them by automating. And automation is great, right? When automation works well, then tasks are really done as well, or even better than by people, right? Take your dishwasher. Probably uses, certainly uses less water and is more energy efficient than you washing your dishes by hand. But the paradox is that automation can take over dull tasks and simple tasks, but not complex ones. And when automation doesn't work and it fails, but you are relying on the automation to do the job, then the results are unpredictable, and they could even be dangerous. A great example for this is the current hot topic of self-driving cars, right? You can have a car go down a highway without lane changes and all that, and do really well these days, right, with current technology. But if something unpredictable happens, then the automation may fail if it's not programmed to deal with that situation, and then it could react much worse than the driver. And the trade-offs here are really difficult and pose immense moral and legal challenges, of course, especially with cars. So how do we design for error then? So first of all, you have to assume that all possible errors will be made. So be ready that people will, if you ask them to type in an 8+3 file name, in old DOS style, they will maybe sometimes type in something else, or they might paste in an emoji and think that should be part of the file name. And they, and then if that doesn't work, that will lead to an error situation. Also, I might add to that, you can also assume that all impossible errors that you never considered possible will also be made, right? There are wonderful stories from technical support hotlines that talk about back when systems still had disk drives. One guy would get a call from a customer who said, "I'm having trouble installing the software that you shipped to me on 2 CDs. So what's the problem?" Well, the second CD, I just can't insert it. The computer won't take it. Well, what's going on? And after a long time, they would discover that that person never tried to take the first disk out of the drive before trying to insert the second one, which is something that maybe nobody thought about at the teams at the shop, selling the software, but it's something that can happen. So as a little wake-up question here, think about today's graphical user interfaces. How do they actually avoid errors happening? What are they doing to get rid of errors, or to make sure that they don't happen? Yeah, Janosch?
Well, I often use Photoshop, and it kind of combines some of the things mentioned. So there are dialog boxes that warn you when you do something that might be unexpected explaining it, but you can turn them off. You can say, don't show this if you're an expert user. So it both doesn't get annoying, but also allows learners to expect unintended behavior or like unintuitive behavior. And then clearly they have like, you can set your own number of undo states. So you can go up to like 80 or 100 undos in a row if you find out that, you know, a massive sequence of actions have been in error.
Yes, yes, exactly. Great. Amit?
So till what extent do we need to think about the impossible errors? Like, for example, people take the cash and forget their card in the ATM, but there might be a case people take the card and forget the cash. So
yes,
I don't think that would be a case, but do we need to think to that extent?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we can never completely avoid all mistakes, because as I said, all possible errors will be made, and then some impossible ones that you didn't even think about. So as with many things in interface design, this designing for error is a design exercise, right? You will have to work out, okay, how can I minimize these problems, and how can I minimize the effect of the most likely errors that will happen. You will never be able to catch all of those. Leonard, go ahead.
Modern software also often requires you to type the name of the thing you want to delete. So for example, in Dynexide, which is some piece of software the RWTH uses for online exams and so on, they require you to type Abgabe, so that you are really, really, really sure that you want to do this exact thing.
Yes, that's a good example. In fact, I had this I usually mention this. If you really want to stop somebody and make them think about what they are trying to do is the right thing, is you make them type in that file name again, or you maybe make them type in that file name backwards, right? So that it's like super hard and super difficult and really engages your conscious thought. But what often happens is two things, three things. First of all, this will often be extremely annoying, right? So it's definitely usability wise, it's not a great move because it makes the system awkward to use. It's intentionally awkward. Secondly, you may get used to it still. So for example, the typing Abgabe works, but if you were to hand in 100 exams, you know, in a row, then you would probably Abgabe will become muscle memory for you. You just type it without thinking. And thirdly, even though, you know, if you make somebody, for example, type in a file name backwards, they have to think about this so hard that there's a good chance that they forget thinking about whether it's actually the file they want to delete. They're fully occupied with that other task you gave them in order to make that happen. So these things are really a difficult beast to deal with. I met years ago when usability was just catching up to the big business. And Microsoft really hadn't quite gotten the hang of it yet. I met an engineer, I met somebody who worked at Microsoft, and her job was usability expert at Microsoft. So that must have been quite something. And she said she made engineers, she made them watch movies in which users were making mistakes with their software. So they would make users, you know, they would make them, the engineers that wrote Word, for example, watch a movie in which a user was trying to create, you know, to print a letter or something, and how they could see how the user failed and made mistakes. And the engineers would be like, no, don't press this button. Don't you see this is the wrong one? But they couldn't do anything about it, right? And feeling this is incredibly helpful. So what we can do is, of course, minimize the chance of errors occurring, minimizing the effects that they have if they are made, make them easy to detect. That's all about feedback, and make them easy to reverse, which is probably the most important one here, but also engineering wise, the most difficult one to do. And as I just described with the Microsoft engineers, watch people using your system and watch them and their slips and mistakes without engaging, right? Without interfering with them. That's an important part. Of course, you don't want to punish people or ignore them when they make mistakes, because we can be very sure that once a user has made a mistake, they are in a bad emotional state already, right? Because that's taking them away from their productivity. And so if you're trying to, you know, people are talking about the research to make computers detect human emotion. I can tell you it's one very easy way to detect emotion. If your software pops up an error dialog, you can be sure that the user is peeved, you know, they're not happy. That's very easy. You can assume that. well, and warning signals and warning features are often bypassed or ignored if they're inconvenient. All right, so with that being said, we're now going to wrap up the discussion on design, on errors and slips and mistakes.
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.